All right. You guys are ready to begin? Yeah. Cool. All right. I'll just tell Mohammed. Yeah, we can start. Okay, cool. Thank you all for coming to this session, Defending the Defenders, the Right to Protect the Environment. It's a very important session. Nice to see a little crowd. I guess the environmental crisis is perhaps the defining crisis of our time. And often the destruction of the environment passes in silence because the environment can't speak, so we rely on brave defenders of the environment to tell us what is happening. And so I'm honored to be joined on stage today by three very brave defenders from 3 different continents. So if we could warmly welcome them. Yeah, so So I'll quickly introduce them and we'll get talking, and about half an hour in, I'll open up for questions. So please think of questions. We'd love to have an interactive session if possible, and have a lively discussion as much as we can. So I'll begin with Monica Lopez Baltonado is an environmental activist and a human rights lawyer from Nicaragua, and she's the author of a book, Handing Over a Country, Legal Implications of Maritime Canal in Nicaragua that President Ortega is trying to build. Then we have John Unzima, who is a Ugandan journalist, freelance journalist with the New Vision newspaper, and also an environmental activist working in the northwest of Uganda with Friends of Zoka, mostly working on issues of illegal logging. And we have Alex Gonzalez Davidson, Spanish environmental activist working in Cambodia, founded a very important environmental defense organization there called Mother Nature that has been persecuted and harassed by the Hun Sen regime. And we're going to speak broadly about the work that they do, the challenges that they face, both purely in terms of bringing to light this environmental crisis, but also from authoritarian states that they work in, and the implications of trying to defend the environment in these repressive political spaces. And so perhaps I can begin with you, Monica. Could you tell us, you've been working on this maritime canal, and you've been trying to oppose it. Could you tell us what's at stake here? Is it the usual conflict, the government's trying to build an economic project that will bring money to communities, and the communities are trying to defend their land, or are they trying to defend a way of life? What is at stake here? Why is it so heated, this conflict?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I'm very happy to be sharing the conversation with you. It's my first time in this Oslo Freedom Forum, and I'm really amazed about the size and the scope and the people that are here. So I appreciate very much the opportunity to share struggles in Nicaragua, not only environmental struggles, but human rights struggles. And the starting point for me would be the intense fight Nicaraguan population have been having against this mega project that it's building up a water canal that would be kind of twice the size of the Panama Canal, but not only that, like a bunch of mega projects associated to that. So this concession to build up all of these projects was given by the current regime in power, which is led by a couple. This is basically a family dictatorship. Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo are currently president and vice president in Nicaragua, and they are a couple, and they gave up this concession to a Chinese private investor. And we found out about all of this mega project 9 years ago. They spent several years negotiating it in secret, and then we found out once the law to approve this was in parliament and approved in 24 hours. Of course, this is a parliament that is controlled by the regime. And what the project and the concession implies is that this investor has rights over the main resources and land in Nicaragua for 100 years. And this include also affecting the main water resource of all Central America, which is Nicaragua's big lake, Lake Cocibolca. Yeah. And of course, it would affect indigenous people's land, local communities, rural communities, and more than 6 protected areas. So it was immense, the impact.
And they didn't have much of a say, I'm guessing, in any of this process. It was
Exactly.
all done in secret.
No, it was completely negotiated in secret, approved, as I mentioned, by a parliament that didn't even wait to have an environmental impact assessment report. There was no sort of consultation, not even with the indigenous communities that, as we know, have the right to be consulted. So it was approved 9 years ago that way. And that gave birth to what I consider to be the most important social movement in Nicaragua for the past, I think, 30 years, which is the Campesinos movement, which have been led by Campesinos as rural communities. Yeah. And they have led more than 100 protests in Nicaragua against the canal. And I would have to say that also, interestingly, triggered a massive rebellion in Nicaragua that happened in 2018.
And do you think it's going to go ahead, or what's your sense?
I think the starting point went very wrong for the regime because so many people along the areas that were going to be affected started massively protesting against it. It was very good that environmentalists joined efforts with rural communities, Afro-descendants and indigenous peoples leader. And I think at the beginning it was massive protests that stopped the project from moving forward. But then the financial failure of this Chinese private investor joined our efforts. And the end, the 2018 protests, massive protests claiming that Ortega Murillo stepped out of power in Nicaragua, and the level of repression that triggered also helped us out that until now, 9 years have passed, and they have not been able to build any of the mega projects that they were thinking of building. It was a complete political failure for the regime, but unfortunately the law is still there, and the regime still in power. So the consequences of it, we are still worried we might see them in the future. So the struggle still is alive. Yeah.
John, maybe moving from Central America to now East Africa, you work in northwest Uganda in a community that has a lot of primal forest, and also serves as a route for exports of logs, of charcoal, of gold, of lots of resources. Tell us about your struggle in your work, your journalism work and your activism work in that part of Uganda.
All right, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. Just like Monica says, it's my first time here, speaking at Oslo Freedom Forum, and I think it's nice that we are sharing this, and I'm learning that we have similar challenges, just like my panelists here. Yes, I come from northwestern Uganda, the extreme northwestern. We are 30 minutes away drive into South Sudan. My region borders 3 countries, Democratic Republic of Congo, towards the southern, and then South Sudan. So these are big countries. You know the story of Congo and resources, and then the story of South Sudan and resources. Yeah. Then now Uganda plays, at the moment Uganda is the center of transit of these natural resources. For instance, Uganda does not produce, there's no official production of gold as such. Gold is produced at artisanal level.
Yes.
But then it's one of the exits of gold, the biggest exit of actual gold in the East Africa.
It's one of the biggest exporters of gold, right?
Exactly, in East Africa,
so there's
yes.
not much mining.
So that gives a picture of really the question of natural resources. From 2016, I and colleagues picked interest because my town has a forest, a central forest called Zoka Central Forest. Because when we were young, we grew up there and we see this forest, we got a lot from the forest. This is the identity of the local Madi people who live there. But then we started noticing illegal activities of lumbering, logging, and encroachment, and charcoal business in it. And then we started, as a journalist, I was assigned to go and do a day's story, just write about it and then see what the activists are doing. Then I encountered an activist who happens to be my friend, but then that very day I could appreciate and see that the problem is bigger than the one we thought would come and cover and leave. So We found people employed by the state, military, and police guarding the people who are doing the illegal destructions. And then since 2016, it has become really my journalism, has become now environmental journalism. So for those of you who have not known much about Uganda, Uganda is one of these countries, I think, that has the longest sitting president in the world now, if I'm not, because he's been there since 1986. I was not there when he became president. So it reaches a point that he looks at the country like his own property. So he does whatever he wants with the resources of the country. And towards the road of defending the forest in my town, we discovered that actually his brother is involved. Yeah. It is a public knowledge that the president's brother is the one cutting the central forest. Yeah. Central forests are the ones that are supposed to be managed by the central government on behalf of the community. This is what the law says in Uganda, that central forests are managed by the government on behalf of the people. So then you have community forests, yes. This is on community land. Like I can plant my forest on my own land. Okay. The most unfortunate bit here is that now the one we gave to the government is the one going. So
the government's supposed to protect those forests, exactly. But they're the ones destroying it.
Yeah, it's the one going, and the one at community land is not going. So we started raising this question. And in 2020, May, we made startling discovery that this is really a network of not simple people. Because we tracked this, where these things are going. We came up to the border with Kenya. These products go as far as Middle East. But then
to the Middle East?
Yes, okay. The Middle East, and perhaps, I don't know, even here in Europe, maybe some sure. of the products are here. Yeah. I can't tell.
Because you said, I remember you were telling me that it's very precious wood that is exported, right? It's wood used for furniture and high quality, rosewood.
Exactly, before we go to the high-end products, these forests are the identity of the people. Mm-hmm. The culture of the Madi people rotates around a tree. Everything we do in our life every day as Madi people, it rotates around a tree. We mingle our food using tree. Actually, we don't eat meat as much as that. We eat leaves, we live on nuts. This is the tradition of the people. That's how important the forest is. But then now, definitely, the person who's coming to cut the forest has seen something in it, and is taking it for the products you've mentioned.
Right.
Yes. Just to say that why I brought the context of Congo and South Sudan is that when we made more discoveries, we realized that actually our region is in the wider target of is part of the wider target of the people who are depleting these forest resources. We went to the border with South Sudan, where I was arrested in May 2020 on gunpoint by Ugandan soldiers who are supposed to be protecting these resources. And then South Sudanese a rebel outfit in South Sudan, they call themselves SPLM in opposition. They are guarding a log deposit, a forest product deposit, illegally. And the orders, guess where the orders to arrest us is coming from? It's coming from the resident district commissioner of that district called Moyo district. So it's like, it's an official but then illegal business. So if you speak about it, like the way I'm doing now, you start getting a sense of feeling that you are challenging the politics of the day. Yeah. So eventually you realize you are being labeled as a of course it gives a negative connotation to the people who sympathizes with this regime that has stayed long in power. Yeah. That you're opposing what we want to do, you're opposing our good deeds to the people, you're a regressive voice. But actually this is really the progressive voice, and this is protecting the livelihood of the people.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's really a conflict between one way of seeing the forest, which is your identity
yes.
for your community, the Friends of Zoka, and then there's an economic sort of group that sees the forest in another way, in financial terms and for exports, and you find yourself up against quite a formidable network.
Exactly. There's a cartel. There's a big network of that cartel behind the state. They use the state. To be precise, they use the state to advance their interests. And you know, the state has all the apparatus, the police, the army, and everything. They have the powers to change the law. In 2017, they intended to smuggle a bill in the parliament to degazette the central forest, I'm talking about Zoka Central Forest, for planting sugarcane. until we decided to organize community event to talk against it. Unfortunately for us, even our local leaders joined, and that voice in a kind helped. But I would like to tell you that that plan is still there, because the idea is that the forest goes, and when the forest goes, they replace it with sugarcane, and then they are into the aspect of the capitalism and making money out of it. But this is not the person from that region.
Yes.
This is somebody from somewhere we don't see. It's very powerful. The contest is between the most vulnerable person whose life rotates around this forest, and this force that you don't see, that wants the forest to go and wanting to take the land. Because after the forest is gone, it is the land. Yeah. When they own the land, then finally the local community is left or no, I mean, there will be nothing to survive about, and then even politically you become less powerful because you cannot speak. This is a question of taking away what you have to make you powerless, to make you have no voice, and it's happening. I grew up there. We used to get a lot of rain. This is mid-year almost. We are going to June. We get only 3 heavy rain, only 3. By this time, we should be growing a lot of food, but the past 3 years, it's not the case. So the local person is already becoming less powerful.
Yes.
You take away what they have, then
hungry.
Something of that sort.
Yeah. Alex, now moving to Southeast Asia. You work in Cambodia, but you can't stay there, you can't live there anymore. You're based in Thailand, like Monica, who's now based in Costa Rica, and I guess John is still based in Uganda. But tell us a little bit about Mother Nature's fight. It's mostly been in sand mining, for construction, for cement, and also hydroelectric dams built by the Chinese. And tell us what it's been like to try and what the impact of these projects has been first.
Well, first I will say I don't really speak English in public, so I apologize. I only speak in Khmer, which is the language of Cambodia. So I apologize in advance. And secondly, I was born in Spain. My father is Spanish, my mother is from England, but I am a Cambodian in my heart. I lived there for 13 years, and I was never given nationality. I was given a deportation order, several 15 years jail time, and now blacklisted. I cannot return. And I'm here today representing the many, many brave Cambodian people, mostly quite young. You've met a few of them.
Yes, when I moved to Cambodia, I lived in Cambodia for a few years. 2 months after I moved there, I heard about Alex, about this European man who spoke excellent Khmer, who was forced to leave, who was asked to leave because of the brave work that he had done.
Yeah, Cambodia is a dictatorship which they like foreigners who go there to give them, I don't know, to do the job of the government, but they don't like foreigners who go there and tell the truth on Facebook, YouTube. So I'm here representing Cambodian people. Hopefully they will come here in the future, not me. I can be sitting there, they can be the ones talking, but right now the Cambodian dictatorship will not allow it. You know, they would be arrested when they go back to Cambodia. I started as an environmental activist. We did campaigns on sand mining, export to Singapore. Singapore imported at least 80 million tons of Cambodian sand to make the country bigger. And Cambodia lost mangroves. Cambodia lost some of its own country.
If you've been to Singapore and you've seen those artificial trees, you know, this part with
Sentosa Island.
Yes, and it's surreal. There's artificial trees built of cement, and the cement is built using sand from Cambodia. So they've destroyed mangrove and primary forest to build an artificial forest with cement trees and with lights, and you know, it's completely surreal.
Next time anybody goes to Singapore and you fly to the airport, you should stick a Cambodian flag on the airport. This is our country. It's true. It's sand from Indonesia, Malaysia, and now from Myanmar, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So the campaign we did, many people. I was deported. 3 of my friends were in jail for a long time, but we forced the Singaporean government to stop the import of Cambodian sand. We did campaigns on fake hydroelectric dams, not real hydroelectric dams, mostly for rosewood. So not only Uganda, Cambodia used to have a lot of rosewood.
Because they're trying to clear the forest to build that catchment zone.
Well, they will have like the family of Hun Sen. Hun Sen is the name of the dictator who has been in power longer. So Hun Sen is number 1 now. He's 1985. World record.
We have a competition.
His family will own the the company which has the right to clear the future reservoir of a hydroelectric dam, which will never produce electricity. So they will basically buy all rosewood from the whole national park and say it came from the reservoir. Right. And the government makes very little. The people in the government will make money, but not the government, not the state. So we did campaigns on that. We actually stopped the hydroelectric dam, which was quite impressive. Again, many people went to jail. And now, over the last 2 years, I was telling you last night, I've realized that unless Cambodia changes from dictatorship to democracy, we will not really achieve much in terms of environmental stuff. So when people ask me, what do you do? I don't no longer say I'm an environmental activist. Now I say I am an anti-dictatorship activist. And it's true, you know. And the government of Cambodia, well, the dictatorship, they don't like it when I say that. But, you know, that's the reality. And the last thing I will say is that there's a lot of hope in Cambodia. I think Thailand too. Myanmar too. I mean, I don't know a lot about Myanmar, but Thailand, where I live now, Cambodia, there's a whole new generation of people who are like, we don't want this anymore. We want to be in a normal country. It doesn't have to be a perfect democracy or a booming economy, but we want freedom, we want true democracy. And this is what really gives me hope. Even though there's a lot of repression, the Chinese Communist Party is completely controlling the Hun Sen regime. Hun Sen is the ex-Khmer Rouge. They can be really violent. Khmer Rouge genocide, 1975. Right. But despite all this, we are, you know, full of hope. I am 100% sure that Cambodia will become a democracy, and I am 100% sure that not just Cambodia, but the whole region will transform. Even Laos, which is extremely repressive, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, Thailand, will become something similar to Eastern Europe 30 years ago, or to Latin America during the 1980s. You know, it will happen. So I'm here to meet people. I'm here to learn new ideas so that we can implement them, and we can force Hun Sen to retire to play golf in Dubai or in Hanoi or in Beijing. Thank you.
Yeah, give him an easy out, right?
One-way ticket, no return.
But it's interesting what you're saying. You're saying that the environmental conflict and this, the fight to protect the environment is actually better served in a broader battle to defend democracy and to fight against authoritarianism.
There's a saying that we use in the Cambodian environmental movement is that what we have been doing for a few years is we are cleaning up the scat, the scat of the elephant. Can I say a swear word? The shit, right? The elephant is shitting in the forest, and we are cleaning up the shit. So we will continue doing this forever. What we need to do is chase the elephant out, meaning chase Hun Sen regime out non-violently, even though they will always be violent.
Yep.
And then hopefully after that, we can return to our environmental activism, reintroducing tigers. No more tigers in Cambodia, completely gone. No more leopards.
From hunting and
poaching, military.
Habitat, yes.
You know, it's always people at the elite. Restore the Mekong River, which is being destroyed by hydroelectric dams, sand mining, and restore the environment and go back and enjoy the beautiful nature. Yeah.
You brought up the violence. Maybe we can go on the group, but we could begin with you. What kind of violence have you faced in trying to defend, you know, these forests, the land, the environment?
One of the good things about the Hun Sen regime, there's a lot of things there's a lot of things they cannot do so easily. It's difficult for them to shoot you. Yes, they can shoot you or torture you, but there's a reaction that was not there 10 years ago. I have a good friend of mine, Chutputhi. He was an environmental activist. Yes. He was murdered in his car 10 years ago, and the reaction was really big. So the good thing is that it's really difficult for the Cambodian regime to kill you. So what they do now is they jail you for incitement, plotting, anything really, you know.
Court cases, that kind of thing.
Court cases. I mean, in my case, they issue an arrest warrant and all these court summons, and then they don't give me a visa. But of course, all my colleagues, they do get a visa because they're already inside the country. So most of the violence is like being jailed in very, very overcrowded and unhealthy conditions. I used to work in jails before with the International Red Cross. I was a translator. And Cambodian jails can really break your spirit. So that's the violence. Even though nobody calls it violence, it is violence. They will stop you from getting a job in the private sector. They will pressure your family. They will threaten you over the phone. They will threaten your school.
Healthcare.
Well, healthcare, nobody in Cambodia gets healthcare. Our healthcare is in Thailand. We have to go to Thailand to pay, So it really is like a systematic, but I think that's a good sign. I think the Cambodian regime is really scared. Everybody in Cambodia is scared because they live in a dictatorship, but nobody is more scared than Hun Sen. We are now doing cartoons. We draw Hun Sen and we mock him. And you see the reaction of him. He's really scared, of a cartoon. So I think that it's a good sign. That's the level of violence is decreasing, but at the same time, it's still very much there, and it's in a way affecting even more people than before.
Monica, how is it in Central America, in Nicaragua? What forced you to flee to Costa Rica? And how are you trying to, fight this battle from abroad now?
Yeah, I would like to start by the maybe positive angle, which is that it was amazing to live and be part of a process where environmental struggles were part of triggering the consciousness of a society to understand we were living under a dictatorship and we needed to achieve a change in the regime. And the social movement against this interoceanic canal concession, but not only that, the fact that in 2018 there was a tremendous fire happening in a protected area in Nicaragua, and that triggered students who many people thought were not looking at the political aspects of their life to mobilize. And that in the end triggered, I would call it a national liberation movement, that it's happening in Nicaragua by non-violent means, which is completely, historically speaking, something new for us in Central America. We've lived several dictatorships. We've lived several dictatorships that were faced by guerrillas, armed groups.
Ortega was he was a hero at one point, right?
I wouldn't call him a hero, but he was part of the process. That's true. He was part of the process against a previous dictatorship we had for 45 years in Nicaragua. And at the moment, I think how the environmental struggles helped out younger generations to engage, it's a very positive outcome. But I want to join Alex's reflection on the fact that at the moment, it's quite evident in Nicaragua that we won't be able to stop the destruction that is happening in terms of all the resources, natural resources in Nicaragua, through mining concessions, all of the things that the regime is doing. If we don't achieve political change, there is an enormous desire to do it by nonviolent means, but the fact is really the violence, to go to your question, that it's coming out of the regime. I would have to be very honest to say we never thought in our darkest dream we would live this level of violence. In 2018, the regime started publicly killing any kind of people in the streets that were protesting with their white and blue flags. More than 350 people were formally documented that were shot by snipers, by police officers, openly in the streets while students were live streaming. This completely shocked everyone, and more protests started happening. And I would have to say that maybe more than 2,000 people have been illegally detained in Nicaragua. At the moment, we have more than 180 political prisoners, which are under the most horrendous conditions. And I want to acknowledge here the presence of one of the families of the political prisoners. Berta spoke here, I think last year. She's in the room, and I want to acknowledge the claim that we are doing in any place we can that these 180 people are released. And when I say torture conditions, I mean they don't have even access to read a book, to have a pen and paper. They are, many of them, in isolated cells. They don't have the possibility even to talk to their kids or to their relatives that are outside. So it's completely terrific what they're doing. They are trying to basically kill them alive by not providing them health services in jail. So we need to make this, take this forum to make this claim. and also to help out, because we know that Nicaragua is a small country in Central America, 6 million people, and every time we hear what's happening worldwide, sometimes you feel, well, how can you call up the attention of a small country like ours? But the reality is that, as many speakers have been saying, if the Nicaraguan situation doesn't resolve positively soon, Central America will once again find in this impossible pathway of how to overcome a dictatorship with this level of repression without using violent means. And we were supposed to have had 40 years ago some peace agreements to change situations in Central America, and that's really a failure of really all the region. It's not a failure only of Nicaraguan politics. So it's very important for us that you are aware that we are under a family dictatorship regime, and to call on your support to help us with the release of the political prisoners at the moment.
Again, the level of violence speaks to the level of fear in the government, and how the environmental battle is not just for the land and natural resources. It's the regimes at least see it as a broader political battle for, to unseat them and take away their power. So before we open up for questions, I'll just come to John, who a few days before coming here, faced a personal threat yourself, and it wasn't clear if you would make it out of your community, if you would get to Kampala to catch your flight here. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about this incident to, indicate the kind of threats and violence that you face in your reporting.
Yeah, just like because I boarded my flight on Wednesday, I think. Today's when, sorry.
Today's Monday.
On Friday.
Yeah.
Yes, on Friday, sorry. And the day before, my colleague William was supposed to be here. He was here last year, the other year, about the last Oslo Freedom Forum. He came around. He was supposed to come, but then I thought I would not come here because the day I was supposed to come, William was stopped at the airport from coming here. So as we talk, I don't know where he is, but when I talked to him in the morning, he got National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders in Uganda. They are keeping him. The violence, if you speak to it, it's really big to say. On the New Year's Eve, coming to this year, we received we have a WhatsApp group for the activists and journalists defending environment. So this WhatsApp group was apparently directed to me. And in it, the conversation is between a regional office of the Prime Minister official, then a local journalist who also became now a politician. And this voice note was shared by the Deputy Prime Minister of Uganda, who happens to be the Member of Parliament of one of the districts of my region there. He's also a general in the army. So in the WhatsApp group, the discussion is that, the audio is that I should be dealt with in the Museveni way.
So they said that they should deal with you
in the Museveni way.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it means, of course, Museveni is the president, and the state under Museveni has been operating like when they dangle the carrot, they give the carrot to you, but if you don't take it, they definitely eliminate you.
So in this case, the carrot was a job they offered you?
Yes, they will offer you a job. My district was offering a job of information person, the communication person of the district, to me 3 times. I turned it down. They sent my former teacher to come to me to talk me into this job. I turned it down. Then later we got this WhatsApp voice note that now I need to be dealt with the Museveni way. So I had to run around the country because there were no opportunities of leaving the country as such.
Because if they offer you the job, then they buy you in a way. They control what you say.
Yes, they control, and they've done it to so many activists and journalists in Uganda, popular journalists, Ugandan journalists who have been respected previously, are now the ones organizing the birthday of the first son. They are the cheerleaders of the first son who's preparing to become the next president of the country, according to what we see happening in the country. So they will buy you, you keep quiet, or they deal with you. Or they curtail your freedom of movement, just like they've done to William, who was stopped at Entebbe Airport, coming here. The incident of being arrested, and in 1983, my parents met, and they were they were students of a medical school. So my parents, they finished medical school and they are saving people's life. So in 2020, I got myself with gun on my head from the army, who's paid by a soldier, who's paid by the taxpayers' money of my country. And he's complaining about me saying, this thing is bad, you're destroying the environment. It sends a very deep, very deep pain into one. You know that really this gun, you purchase it with your taxpayers' money. This gun is supposed to be, if it's useful anyway, it's supposed to be used to protect what the country is having. But this gun is used to take away what the country has, right? So, a lot of things. In 2017, I was beaten in front of police, just like this police were watching. It was just a stage set. There was a riot protest in town. I went to cover just as a journalist, and then I was roughed up. Later, when we followed, it was properly orchestrated by the police. So to say, on my case on the WhatsApp voice note, when I tried to report to the nearest police station in my town, they turned me down. They cannot record my statement. They say I am not supposed to record my statement there. I had to come to police headquarters in Kampala. They recorded the statement, but as I speak now, nothing came out of that. Nobody is being summoned to come and answer. Why are you sending this message to this person? I mean, it's this feeling that where justice meets a dead end, you know. It meets a dead end and nothing happens. So for all the things that have been happening, my colleague William many times has been accused of stealing charcoal, you know, because the community rises up and impounds trucks because of the work we do. But then they will say, the police will write a statement and say it is the activists who've stolen charcoal. But then at the end of the day, it's the police who takes the charcoal and something like that. So trumped up charges, things that do not exist is brought up against you. There have been house break-ins, of course, blackmail. You are being blackmailed. My sister had to leave the town. My sister is now somewhere in Uganda, but then had to leave my town because the least I can afford is for people to know her that she's my sister. Local people have known her, but a bit distant people don't know. And
so she's safer a little bit
further. A bit safer, yes. My girlfriend cannot understand why I cannot openly move with her like that because it's not real easy.
Personal,
yes,
because
something will happen. There's a way they want to put pain in you, and if they cannot reach you, definitely they will reach
people
someone closer to you. Yep. And social life is not there for people like me. Where you don't go to the public park to see it. You have to be conscious of what you do. You have to always check the security detail of your actions, know what will happen next, because nobody is controlling you. But I mean, nobody's after you. I mean, nobody's taking care of you. You have to take care of yourself. This is a situation where now we live in. We watch our shadows even with a lot of care. Yes, we managed to through the work, we managed to change a few things. There's a small critical mass that is growing. The last election, local politicians lost election, mainly because of the question of the forest and natural resources. The people are seeing it, but the force to see it is a little bit watered down by the powerful force that is coming to counter the efforts, yeah.
Maybe we can open, yes, a question here, and then, yes, go ahead, please. Thank you, and appreciate that it's a pointed question. Any other questions that we can collect? Yeah, sure. Great. Another question? Any others? Yeah. We'll take two more, or two or three. Yes, please. I saw a question back there, yeah?
It seems like there's both the threat of international investment from state actors and both from multinational corporations. Have you found that their tactics are similar, or is there a little bit of difference between, let's say, sort of a multinational corporation trying to extract resources versus a government like the Chinese government or some of the sort of other foreign governments that are directly involved in this extraction?
One last question, anybody else? No? Or we can... Perfect. So everyone's around, so we're around for the next 3 days. Obviously, I'm not sure we're going to get to all these questions in full detail, but feel free to reach out and maybe so the questions were international support, do you get enough support? And I think that's relevant also here. There are technologists, there are journalists, there are people who can give you visibility, tools. What do you need? Are you getting enough support? We talked a little bit about the, democracy versus political versus environment, how they're together and, how they're separate. Then, can your work become safer? Can we make the cost lower for people like yourselves? And corporations versus governments, do they use different tactics? Have you seen any difference in the way they operate? Maybe we can just, a couple of minutes each. Yeah?
Let's start the other way around.
Okay.
In answer to the first question, I don't think support from United Nations or European Union is there. If you're in Cambodia and you go to jail, there are grants for your family to go and visit you. I mean, it's not enough, but I don't think that the biggest gap is not in international support, at least in Cambodia. The biggest gap lies in the inability of Cambodian activists, politicians, syndicate leaders, pro-democracy activists to unite. It's really difficult. And I think that's because you are living in a dictatorship for so long who has taught you to be paranoid of everybody else, distrust everybody else. This intelligence community has infiltrated. They're not intelligent, but they call themselves that. They infiltrate all the groups, and they make you think, oh, who is this person? Is he a spy? So it's really hard to get support from fellow Cambodians. And the other thing that we really would like to see is more assistance or more support among Southeast Asian people, like I said before, Thai activists, Cambodian activists. Because I think if you think too global, sometimes it's too abstract. Cambodian people, they support Nicaragua, they support Uganda, but it's far different language, the culture is completely different. But if you talk in Cambodia about Hong Kong activists, they can really identify with that. But the level of support between Hong Kong, Thailand, Cambodia, at least in Cambodia, is really low. So I think that would be, my top preference would be less attention by international, not less, same attention by international, because if you lose it, it's really bad, right? Yeah. But to try and make it more inside Cambodia and regionally amongst the same people who are fighting for democracy.
Thanks. Very insightful.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. You want me to go first?
No, go ahead.
All right. I think the question whether we get the support this is what I see from the grassroots, what I see happening in my community, and which I think should be a bit questioned, and also because the regimes we are talking about have their own narratives. They come with different narratives on global platforms. And this puts them in a picture of advantage. They give them more advantage than the voices that the activists or the journalists are trying to put up. For instance, I give you an example. Uganda is credited as a model refugee host country, right? My region alone hosts over 500,000 South Sudanese refugees, which is positive. Who is hosting these refugees? It's not. If you go to the grassroots, it's not the government hosting the refugees, in my view. It's the people who have the goodwill to live with other people hosting it, because this idea is just being used as a tool to give the government a good face outside, but then inside something wrong is happening. So the global community needs to start questioning some of the support being given to these regimes. And I think if these supports are put into in a way that will give you this, and then you have to do this, will be better, because if you support them, and then the voices of the activists are not reaching out, definitely they will continue to perpetuate what they are doing. And what at this platform, what I will just ask for is that I think working at a regional level is okay, but then also globally, they need to question the support rendered on the other, because somebody asked a question about politics and activism. This is it. These two are not distinct from what we are doing. You cannot separate the two. In Uganda, we have a public management law. It's called Public Management Act. It came up about 4 years ago. And the law says, for you to gather, you must get permission, or you must get notification from police. Now, they don't define what gathering, which gathering they don't define.
So they selectively apply.
Yes, which literally means that even in your family, when you call for a family function, they can literally come and say, close it, go home. It's not allowed. So your good intention to do something right is definitely turned political by the power that be.
Yeah.
See? So it's really difficult to separate, but of course the need for networking, they need to grow grassroots journalism, local journalism, very critical. Local journalism needs to be grown to tell this story, to go far, where the environment I operate, the media is not developed as in other places. Just before he came here, he was telling me, John, Uganda is not in the news. Yes, Uganda is not in the news, but a lot is happening. And it's until the big events happen, it's until Uganda goes to election, that's when you start seeing Uganda in the news. It's until, and literally government chooses what to go in the news. If they choose that the refugees are arriving, let's get the big press there to tell the story, they will take it there. But then they will never tell you the story of the things happening. My town currently is going to be connected by a 66-kilometer road, being upgraded with money from European Union. 54 million euros is going to be upgraded. But then the first thing that starts moving away from this town on this road is the forest products and the logs.
Yeah.
And for me, I think this money needs to be questioned and say, okay, well, we are giving you the money to do the road, but then what are you taking away from the people on this road?
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, the government is going to use the same road for telling people, you see, you need to vote me again because we have done the road, but then you're taking the resources away. So this is the kind of complex interplay we see in this thing. Certainly networking is needed. The need to grow and empower local journalism to tell this story is very, very important. We should not wait for the big media from elsewhere to come and tell the story, but the network of grassroots journalists who are already in the system of telling this story needs to be empowered and to tell the story the more. There are few who have the guts, who have the energy to stand there and feel the heat. We say that if you don't want to take the smoke, just leave the kitchen. And this is the narrative that family members tell us, please, you are wasting a lot of time inside there. You just leave it. You just leave it. It's not going to help you. That's it.
I wanted to reply to the question of the international community because I was listening to Thor, who is the CEO of the Human Rights Foundation, saying how this is a forum, right, about discussing authoritarian regimes. But I do think we need to discuss the role of democracies in what's happening in countries like ours. Nicaragua, for many, many years, we have been denouncing the crimes that were being committed against indigenous peoples' leaders, the crimes that were being committed against environmentalists. And it was until the bloodshed was so open and so massive and so evident that the international community started reacting properly to the situation. And Nicaragua has been assigned a geopolitical role historically from the perspective of the northern countries, which is the United States. And the role they have assigned to our country and the region is, okay, if the regime or government in power, if it's stopping migration from reaching us, if it's stopping drugs from reaching us, and if they are working well with free trade agreements, that's okay. And for many years, this regime was undermining all the democratic institutions in Nicaragua, was selectively killing and violating human rights. And nobody was reacting properly to that deterioration. And democracies have a responsibility. It cannot be the standard until the bloodshed is so evident in the streets that we start worrying about it. And I'm very sad to say that what happened in Nicaragua could have been prevented if a stronger reaction to all the different step by step, how they were destroying everything. And there were Nicaraguan voices strongly saying from civil society, this is going to lead to a dictatorship. And it was very hard to convince the international community. So I do think forums like this need to discuss the level of responsibility in what implies how these dictatorships evolved. And finally, I would like to say also that unfortunately Latin America is the deadliest continent for environmental activists. Colombia, it's terrible. Honduras is terrible. I don't know if with the current situation in the continent, we will be able to make environmentalist activism safer. For me personally, and I would like to share just close with this, I was very shocked by the killing of Berta Cáceres, a person that I respect a lot, an environmental activist internationally recognized. I saw her just a few months before she was killed, and I think it's a very difficult decision for an environmental activist to decide if you are putting your own life at risk. That's the reason why in 2 times, I decided to exile. The first time 1 year, and just recently, 10 months ago, I decided to leave the country again. My purpose is to keep working on this, but in the end, I decided I didn't want the regime to have the power over my body if they get me, because I have a long profile of in their view, not positive. But this is a very personal decision, very difficult decision, and you have to respect any decision that it's done in this sense. But unfortunately, I don't see that environmental activism or even human rights activism in general becoming safer, at least not in Nicaragua and not in Latin America, to talk about the broader context. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We're out of time, but thank you so much for all of your important contributions, and thank you for the questions. And
Yes. I just like to say, if you see this flag, it's backwards because it's a protest symbol for Nicaraguan people. Are more than 200,000 Nicaraguan people requesting asylum worldwide, and my call to this forum is support refugees requesting from any part of the world, any place. It's very important because it's the only way we can recharge batteries to come back to our countries and keep the struggle. So, thank you. I just like to say, if you see this flag, it's backwards because it's a protest symbol for Nicaraguan people. Are more than 200,000.
Thank you all so much for coming to our panel about fighting transnational repression of journalists. My name is Megha Rajagopalan. I'm a reporter with BuzzFeed News. We have a really star-studded group of panelists here today who work on a whole basket of different issues and are all very accomplished journalists and activists in their own right. I'll just introduce them very quickly. To my left here is Roshan Abbas. She is the founder and executive director of the Nobel Peace Prize nominated Campaign for Uyghurs in Washington, D.C.
so much.
And she's one of the most prominent Uyghur activists in the United States. She actually got her start as an activist, as a student leader at Xinjiang University, where she joined pro-democracy protests as a student. And when Radio Free Asia launched its Uyghur language service in 1998, which is still the only Uyghur language broadcast publication outside of the region, she was the first Uyghur reporter broadcasting daily to the region by radio. Next to her is Masi Alinejad. She's an Iranian journalist, activist, and author of the 2018 memoir, The Wind in My Hair, My Fight for Freedom in Modern Iran. Among other things, she's the host of a television show on Voice of America's Persian language service, and she's covered a whole range of subjects and was a parliamentary reporter before as well, but she's best known, I think, for her campaign against the compulsory hijab in Iran, which has included a number of social media campaigns, including her White Wednesdays campaign, which I hope we'll talk about in this conversation. And she was forced out of Iran in 2009 after years of threats over her reporting, which was critical of the ruling regime. And next to her is Can Dündar, who is a Turkish journalist and columnist and an extremely prolific author of, I think, about 20 books. He was the editor-in-chief of the center-left Cumhuriyet newspaper in Turkey until August 2016. He was jailed for 92 days in the year before that, along with a colleague, for reports on the interception of trucks bound for Syria that apparently belonged to Turkish intelligence. And one of his most recent projects, which I also hope to talk about, is a publishing house in Germany that will specialize in publishing books that are banned in Turkey. So I wanted to talk sort of first about, I want to talk both about kind of conventional media coverage and social media, and also how we can kind of all work together, between borders to protect journalists and create better journalistic work. But I wanted to start first with Can. I was wondering if I could ask you a little bit about your experience of being arrested as a journalist, and I was curious whether the kind of international attention that was brought to your case, but both by press freedom organizations and by international media, like what impact did that have on the case, and what were your thoughts about it?
A lot of impact. Imagine yourself in a prison cell all alone in solitary confinement, and they are giving you daily paper, which is kind of censored or government control, but in the last page, a small news about yourself saying that PEN International or Reporters Without Borders is campaigning for you. You can't imagine the impact of it on you, because you all of a sudden you realize that the world is aware of you and you are not alone, and someone is taking care of you somewhere in the world. It's an immense impact on a prisoner in suffering.
And do you feel that in cases like yours, where there are in politicized cases, in maybe in Turkey in particular, which is a huge jailer of journalists, do you think that generally speaking, more attention leads to better results, or is there a balance that should be struck?
Of course, I mean, more you get the attention of the world public, you are more secure, of course. And it's a kind of protection. And at the same time, it turned the prison turned into a kind of microphone for you, that you can, nobody can listen to you if you are free, if you are a free journalist. But if you are in jail, then the world starts, listening to you. This is ironic but true. So thanks to my imprisonment, I had the chance to explain the human rights conditions in Turkey. So that's also important. But we should support those organizations like PEN, RSF, CPJ, they are all working for journalists in jail or under threat.
Yeah. And Roshan, I wanted to ask you, sort of along similar lines, you've done so much work for years now campaigning on behalf of your sister. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what's happening with your sister, and then also, like, sort of for you, what is the value of media coverage in this campaign for her to be freed? Like, how can sort of the international media play a role in that?
Thank you so much, Maya. The Oslo Freedom Forum is being the platform, actually, to talking about China's genocidal policies, which started with you in 2018 when you took the stage and talked about the dystopian hell on earth, how China was conducting the genocidal policies in our homeland. At that time, the world didn't know much about what's happening to Uyghur people. And then 2018, September 5th in 2018, I spoke on a panel like this, was televised live at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. 6 days after that panel, my own sister, a retired medical doctor, she was abducted to punish me for my advocacy work in America as an American citizen. So basically today, I am speaking out. I am advocating for millions of Uyghur people who are being detained in concentration camps, imprisoned, long sentences for just being Uyghur, and as well as being modern-day slaves and making products for most of the Western brand, and they are making this genocide a profitable venture. And I'm doing all that at the cost of my own sister's freedom. And I talked about my husband's family on that panel. He's sitting among us. He has no communication with his family, 24 people from his family since spring of 2017. We don't know if my in-laws are still alive and where they are being held at. And the same for my sister. I don't know if she's still alive. She's a retired medical doctor, which retired in an earlier age due to the health reasons, and I have absolutely no information. That's why it's frustrating for me when I don't see the genocide of the Uyghurs, which the Uyghur women's bodies becoming the battleground of this genocide taking place. The Uyghur women are facing forced sterilizations, forced abortions, forcibly inserting IUD devices on their bodies. The Uyghur children are taken away from their families. And the Chinese state media reported actually 1.1 million Han Chinese cadres moved into Uyghur homes, live inside of their houses, supervising and monitoring their daily lives, while the husbands are all gone to the prisons or concentration camps or the forced labor facilities. Uyghur women are facing sexual abuse in their own bed. Something like this never happened anywhere in the world, but where are the feminists? Where are the active voices who are supposed to defend women's and children's rights? When I look at the mainstream media, many of the politicians, and so many vocal celebrities, famous celebrities who are so vocal against any kind of social injustice, when the perpetrator is China, and the perpetrator has the money and the power, they are all silent. That's why it's extremely important for international media to cover this story truthfully, rightfully, while China is spreading so much disinformation and the false narratives. It is very important to build that critical mass to stop this genocide. Yeah. Thank you.
And Masi, I wanted to ask you, because you worked for a long time as a journalist within Iran, and then you're still doing this work now that you live abroad. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the kind of differences between the two, and have you felt that you can be more effective because of less censorship when you're abroad, or is it the other way around?
First of all, I want to say hi to everyone, and thank you so much for coming, because I know that means a lot to all of us, and together we are stronger. Thank you. I have to say that when I was in Iran, I got kicked out from everywhere.
Right.
As a parliamentary journalist, I just exposed the corruption. I mean, if it was here, everywhere in the West, I would have received an award. My award was just being kicked out because I published the pay slips of the member of the parliament. So personally, I don't have good memory, but I have to say that now the situation has changed. When I was there, social media was not that big and powerful. Look, now I really want to actually use the opportunity and tell you that the main journalists are not those who are working for mainstream media at all. In my country, the main journalists are ordinary people. I want to actually give you an example. When Iran protests took place, all the journalists were silent because, first of all, you cannot say anything. It's red line. If you do, you go to prison. They kick out all the international journalists. There are some correspondents there from CNN, I don't want to name. Some journalists from international media are there, but they live on their own bubbles. They don't want to lose their connection with the politicians. So guess what they do? They go to the reformists, they go to the politicians, they actually write something about the narrative of the government. But in the street, you see that brave people, they film the last moment of their life. We hear that one of the protesters say that people come to the street, let's get rid of the regime. And immediately he got shot in the head in front of the eyes of his mother. And his mother became his voice right now. The regime actually said that, okay, I know you asked about my work, but I give you these pictures to tell you that. So when they make videos, they have to find the media. They send it to me. But the government made a law saying that the head of the Revolutionary Court went on TV and said that anyone sent videos to Masih Alinejad will be charged up to 10 years prison because they think it's just maybe it's me. There are millions of people within the society and many activists outside Iran. The link between them now created a new journalism, in my opinion. And if you want to actually hear the true voice of Iran right now, just go to social media, just open your eyes toward the people within the society. So I want to finish with this. These mothers who lost their beloved one in Iran, I still get goosebumps when I talk about them. When they were told not to speak up, they took the picture of their beloved one. They went to the same streets saying that this is the street that you shot my son. This is the street that you killed my beloved one. And now to me, these are the true journalists. These are the true media. They became their own storytellers while they know that this is a risk. As my sister mentioned, these people within the society with their own camera, which became their weapon, their mobile phone, now they are louder than the feminists around the world. They are louder than the journalists and mainstream media around the world. But as we see, journalists in Norway, I mean, I have to say that it's a big shame that they invited Taliban here, and then you see the feminist female politicians bow to the Taliban wearing compulsory hijab. But in my country, Iran, in Afghanistan, thanks to brave through feminists within these two countries, they say no to compulsory hijab, they say no to Taliban, and to me, these are the true face of new media and new feminism. That's all I believe. Sorry. I know Norway is not going to invite me anymore, but I had to say that because seeing that picture of female politicians wearing hijab in front of Taliban, it breaks my heart and the heart of many women inside Afghanistan. I had to actually use this opportunity. Thank you, Norway, for inviting me.
You're a very good speaker. Just one more for you. I wanted to ask, I mean, you're a person with a huge platform, I think on any platform really, but I really have to admire how you've used social media, I think, to expand the reach of your work. And I was curious if you could talk a bit about, like, what should the role of the platforms be for activists and journalists? Like, what is their sort of obligation to you? And also, could you talk a bit more about, like, what is the utility of social media for you?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I used the opportunity to talk about those women inside Iran because honestly, this is, if it's my platform, I say that. If I have 8 million followers on my social media, it's all because of those citizen journalists within the society. Yeah. And I have to say that Instagram is banned from Iranian people. So, but I have more followers than the Ayatollahs. So you see, that's the power of. So that actually shows you a better picture of Iran. It's like the Ayatollahs, they have money, they have power, they have prison, they have everything. They have guns and bullets. But people, they only have their camera and they send their videos to me and I publish it. And recently I heard that Instagram moderator was offered by the Islamic Republic 10,000 euro to remove my Instagram account. So, and I got in touch with Sheryl Sandberg 3 times, which I found out that my Instagram doesn't appear on the search. I mean, nobody could find me. And I was not able to go live on Instagram. I was shocked because people were getting killed in the street. They were sending videos to me. I have to say that it's not just me. I'm just one of the examples. They did that to some mainstream media like Iran International, like Manoto TV, like Iran Radio Farda, and many other activists. There are another like well-known social media platform covering Iran protests. 1,500 people got killed, and this page is just covering the story of the families. So the Iranian government used the moderators in tech companies to censor us. So again, in the West, we think that we are safe, but the tech companies, instead of kicking out the dictators, they are actually removing some of the photos and videos of Iran protests. I still didn't lose hope, didn't lose my page. I'm fighting to actually, for other people to get their Instagram page back, but I use my social media every day to tell people that, look, my government did everything to me to break me. They went after my family. They put my brother in jail. They brought my sister on TV to disown me publicly. They interrogated my mother. They even sent someone here to kidnap me. Everything you think, they did to break me. So, and I tell myself every day, with my weapon, with my social media, I have 2 options. Feel miserable, or make my oppressors feel miserable. I choose second one. That's it.
Well said. John, I wanted to ask you something kind of along similar themes. I mean, I think everyone here has probably felt the pressure of kind of transnational pressure, you know, from the regimes that you might have escaped. And I was curious, like, I mean, if you could talk a bit about your recent project to publish books that are banned in Turkey, and whether you felt any pressure from the Turkish government, either on that project or really on any of your work since you've departed.
Of course. I'm just listening, Masih and Rushan. I was trying to imagine the immense of pain even in this meeting, and imagine this whole building. We sacrificed a lot, we lost a lot. I mean, our country, our freedom, our family members. For what? For defending the truth, for freedom, for a democratic country or a world, free world. So, of course, the price is so high, but now we are a family here. Turkish government is supporting China and ignoring Uyghurs because they have interest there or they are scared. And Turkish government cooperating with Iranian regime because they need good ties with Tehran. So this is not about Turkey, Iran, China, Norway. It's about dictators against freedom fighters. This is the tug of war between the two. So that's why we have to come together and support each other. And it's a good way, of course, my project was there are censored books, banned articles in Turkey. So I'm trying to publish them because 20 years ago it was not possible. But today you can distribute it via internet for free and you can reach your audience, your readers. And not only that, there are projects like Forbidden Stories, for example. If your story is somehow forbidden or censored, other journalists from different countries come together and work on follow up your story, which is an international solidarity attempt, but also a very good journalistic investigation. I guess we can only get rid of and cope with this censorship and oppression if we come together and work together. And that's the one way of supporting this project.
That's interesting that you brought that up. This is something I struggle with a lot, which is that the way that journalism works is sort of inherently competitive, and I think that that dynamic exists even between local journalists and international, and it is kind of in conflict, I think, with some of our aims. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit, like how is it possible, or how should we cooperate in a way that's more effective?
Imagine Panama Papers. I mean, we came together, hundreds of journalists came together, and because all the dictators have a kind of agenda or a kind of roadmap, and they are copying each other, they are collaborating with each other. So they know how to govern the country, how to run, just seize the media, get rid of rule of law, advance parliamentary regime, and put pressure on people, arrest the journalists and the rival politicians, etc. They have a kind of roadmap. So we should have a roadmap to cope with it, because the attack against our freedoms are global, so we should just fight against it globally. And this collaboration, cross-border journalism is so, shining nowadays, I guess. And we start finding each other, working together against our aggressors. And this is, I guess, this is the best thing we can reach so far in journalism. And I guess cross-border journalism is at the peak of it at the moment. And with Panama Paper, we saw that we can really expose them, expose their corruption cases if we come together and work together.
And yeah, and I guess also for you, you've published very extensively within Turkey, and then you've published outside as well. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about, like in these kind of cross-border projects, is there more utility in publishing within a country where you're trying to create change, or is there more utility in publishing, somewhere where censorship and blowback against journalists is less of a problem?
Imagine my story was about Turkish intelligence service was smuggling arms to Syria. So it includes Syria. The arms were coming from Ukraine, and they were taking the arms from Serbia. And United States was kind of involved in all those and Canada, a group of journalists in Canada is searching for the trace of the arms shipment. So it's already a big, huge project. So now we are Canadians, Americans, Syrians, Turkish journalists, Kurds. So we have a huge project, and we can expose the whole war strategy of Turkey and Syrian regime, etc. So this is a very good example of how can we cope with our aggressors. And I guess if we can come together, we can really expose them. And just today we learned that 4 billion people under aggressive regimes, we are crowded. It's a huge population. It's more than half of the population of the world. So we should do something together to get rid of them.
Roshan, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about this idea of pressure across borders. I think the Uyghur community knows this very, very acutely. I was wondering if you could sort of explain how does China put pressure on especially Uyghur journalists and other journalists who work on this issue, and then put pressure on sources as well, and what impact has that had on just the story coming out?
Radio Free Asia Uyghur Service is doing an amazing job covering the story. but so many of them are paying the price of their family members are taken hostage. And also, as you mentioned, the people back home, they are being hostage taken by the regime. The entire Uyghur population, they cannot speak out. Their phones are tapped, has a special app, so the government can track them. So it's extremely difficult to get any information out. But even with that, they are using everything they can to communicate with Radio Free Asia reporters and getting the little bit of video clip or some pictures out. So it's extremely difficult for the journalists to go and cover the story there. And we are seeing the front of everybody's eyes what happened in Hong Kong. And also today, what we are watching, what Putin is doing in Ukraine, that is an example of what happens when you appease the dictator. The world community, the world leaders are basically being manipulated by the Chinese government, and China is using the trade threats, manipulation in United Nations as the second largest donor, and the power of the Belt and Road Initiative, and the debt trap diplomacy. China is becoming the power strong arm of the world today. So my question is, for the people, for those leaders of our countries here, I'm sure we're having people from all different countries. Some of them are from Middle East, Muslim majority countries. Some of them are from free Europe, the Western countries. Why our leaders are not speaking out? Why our corporations are not speaking out? Genocide should be our red line. There's no neutrality in genocide. There's the perpetrator and the enablers. China is the perpetrator. Everyone else choosing the silence, and those companies making profit of Uyghurs' blood, sweat, and the tears, they are the enablers. And also those companies, those leaders of those countries, making all of us complicit. Because today we go out, buy things from those Western brands that we all love to use. We are all complicit because these companies are using Uyghur slaves for their supply chains. So when those leaders, we should ask our lawmakers, our leaders, our politicians, when they are voluntarily giving up their freedom of speech, they are not speaking out against China's genocidal policies. What does that mean? That's not just that they are giving up their freedom of speech, freedom of expression. They are giving up their sovereignty. China's in, actually. This is not something that's within their borders, and the people are being harassed, taken hostages in East Turkestan or within China. It's in our parliaments, in our media, social media. Look at the Twitter. The Chinese officials are using the platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and the Facebook, attacking us, demonizing us. While the 1.4 billion Han Chinese people have no access to social media, why Twitter is allowing the Chinese officials to attack us and spreading disinformation? So when we have our academia are losing the freedom of speech, and that there are actually Western scholars speaking out for China and denying the genocide. There are 3 sets of Chinese government's own leaked documents, but we have the Americans or French or European academics sitting and basically denying the genocide and defending China. What does that mean? So what the Chinese government is doing is not just the future of the Uyghurs anymore that's at stake here. We have been crying out loud for years. Since 2014, we have been trying to get attention from the West to help Uyghurs. So it's not just the future of the Uyghurs anymore. Now help yourselves. Help those countries before it's too late. Because China is in every country, manipulating every country's systems, media, mainstream media are not reporting so many things that's happening to Uyghur people today. And look at the High Commissioner of the United Nations, Michelle Bachelet. She's in China today. But what happened to the human rights report that we have been asking for past year and a half? When China is conducting active full-speed genocide and sitting on the Human Rights Council in United Nations, we are inviting the murderer to judge his own trial, basically. So basically, the world system, the values, the rights that everyone takes for granted here in the West, and your parents, your grandparents worked so hard to establish last 50 to 70 years, that's being jeopardized by China today. So if we don't take action, not just to help for Uyghurs, but help to save this free world, then everybody should just look at the Uyghur peoples today and the picture tomorrow and the world that we are leaving behind for our children and for our grandchildren.
I want to return to a point that you made about social media, I think, has been really instrumental in bringing more attention to the Uyghur cause in particular, but that this issue is like the issues that you face around trolling, especially state-sponsored trolling from the Chinese government. I wanted to ask you about this, Masi, because I know this must be something that you deal with every single day. How has that sort of changed your ability to do your work? And then also, can you talk a bit about what would you hope the platforms would do in response?
First of all, I want to say that when my sister was talking about how dictators are enjoying freedom on social media, I couldn't even breathe. How did you feel? Does it make you angry? But being angry is not enough. We have to take action. Write to your local media. Write to your local politicians. It's unbelievable. Taliban is enjoying freedom on social media. China, Ayatollahs, 80 million people are banned from Twitter. My people were getting killed just last week. People were getting shot in the chest, in the head, in my country. At the same time, Iranian government shut down the internet. They killed 1,500 people 2 years ago. If they were punished 2 years ago, they wouldn't dare to do it. But when the tech companies, I'm angry. And one time when I was furious, I saw the bloody face of protesters in the street, and I went to social media. I said, fuck you tech companies. Why don't you kick out dictators? My government shut down the internet right now. And some of the journalists from mainstream media complained my language. Can you believe that? They complained my language because I use F-word. But they didn't say anything to kick out Khamenei, China, Erdogan, Putin, all these dictators. They must be kicked out from Twitter. And all of you remember when Garry Kasparov was warning everyone, saying that winter is coming. It's the title of his book. He was warning the whole world about Putin. When I got invited by Garry Kasparov to come to Oslo Freedom Forum for the first time, many left, Democrat, liberal, warning me, he's warmonger, he's right-wing, don't go there, don't appear with him. He has been ignored for years and years. Now war is here. We, the people of Middle East, we know war. We know the pain of Ukrainian people. Maybe you're new to this, but we carry the scars on our shoulder. We carry the wounds of war every corner we go. The people of Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Iran. So when you ignore people like Garry Kasparov, when you ignore my brother from Turkey, when you ignore my sister, when you ignore all of us who are fighting against dictators, then dictators will come here and you have to challenge them on your own soil. When we don't end dictators, now, as you hear in Oslo Freedom Forum, they will end us. They will come after us. I always say that dictators are more deadlier than coronavirus. They will infect the rest of the world. Right now, I have one question and I'm going to leave you. You have to answer this question to me, all of you. If in your country, women are not allowed to go to a stadium, Do you call this a normal sport? Or you ask FIFA to ban and boycott that country until the day that women are allowed to go. What would you do? You call FIFA? Or you say, let's just, women cannot go to stadium, it's okay, but men are happy. What would you do? Answer to me. No? But what is different between the women of Iran and the Western women? It has been 40 years. Women of Iran are not allowed to go to a stadium. But when we call FIFA to ban the Islamic Republic, here, Western feminists, Western media tell us, shh. If in your country, Muslim women get beaten up to remove their hijab, what would you do? You stand up in solidarity, no? But in my country, it has been 40 years. Women are forced to cover themselves. Western feminists, Western journalists go in front of Islamic Republic and Taliban, they bow them and they cover themselves in the name of my culture, or they don't want to cause Islamophobia. Wait a minute. As a woman who grew up under Sharia law, I have the right to be scared of Islamism. And I'm not scared of you calling me Islamophobic, because you all should be scared of Taliban, ISIS, and Islamic Republic. Join us. Call international community. Do not legitimize Taliban. Kick out Islamic Republic and Taliban from everywhere. Because if it was the Western people suffering from this kind of regime, you would do the same. There is no difference between us. The blood of people of Afghanistan is not different than the blood of people of Ukraine. The blood of people in Iran are not different than the blood of people in the West. The right of women in Iran and Afghanistan is not different. Thank you. Sorry.
I think that's a really good place to end this discussion with this idea of cooperation across borders and the idea that we should have the same standards for the rights of people everywhere and not just in our countries. Thank you once again to all three of our panelists. It was a very, very informative discussion. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. Oh, they want to ask questions?
You're welcome to come up, yeah. We're just out of time, that's all, yeah. We're just out of time. Yeah.
I think I talk too much. That's why I'm very sorry. I can give you a hug instead. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm not trying to ban.
Move on. So good afternoon. So since there's no introduction, so let me introduce my guest today. So Nury Turkel. So it's a long bio here. Okay.
I
fine.
think people can look it up.
So okay. So
can
attorney, foreign policy expert, rights advocate, nearly 2 decades of experience, specialization, corporate governance, compliance, national security, foreign policy.
That's enough, Garry.
Authoritarianism, forced labor, supply. Yeah, he has good credentials, just trust me. So, currently serving as vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, after being appointed as a commissioner by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi in May 2020. So testified before Congress, speaking. Okay. So policy recommendations have been incorporated into U.S. laws and pending bills relating to Uyghurs and China. So that's serious. And as rights advocate, he has led efforts to raise the profile of Uyghurs' cause. Previously as the president of the Uyghur American Association, now chair of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, which he co-founded in 2003. He also advised past and present leadership of the World Uyghurs Congress. Senior fellow at Washington think tank, the Hudson Institute. Okay, fine. This is okay, perfect. Many publications. 2020 Time Magazine, 100 most influential people in the world. 2021 listed as one of the Fortune's 50 greatest leaders. June 2021 received the inaugural Notre Dame Prize for Religious Liberty. Okay. So here we talk about your new book.
Yes.
So, and natural question, it's about your book. Why did you write this book, and why the title is No Escape? Because, look, everybody talks now about Ukraine, Belarus, Europe, but we cannot forget, the evil is unfortunately spread around the globe, and one of the most tragic moments in modern history is Uyghurs genocide in China. So, and your book is, of course, about this one. The title, No Escape. We want to be a bit more optimistic. So why is No Escape?
Garry, thank you so much. I wanted to begin by thanking Human Rights Foundation, specifically you inviting me to come to speak at the Oslo Freedom Forum about 3 years ago. That gave birth to the idea of writing this book. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I wanted to thank you for your leadership in the efforts to wake up the world in the face of Putin's dictatorship and Xi Jinping's communist China. I gave a book, No Escape, for two reasons. One, even though I have been a free citizen of the United States or free world, I have been living with the fear of reprisal by the regime in Beijing. I have been, it's been very costly work for me on a personal level. I have not seen my mother for 18 years. The last time I saw my mother was when she was in Washington for my law school graduation. Recently, my dad passed away. I was in Uzbekistan on an official trip, literally next door. I could not go to China to be with my mother and carry my dad's casket. That's kind of a tragic side of my life. So I have not been free. So I have not been able to escape the Chinese repression. And I'd like to add that I was born in a re-education camp during the height of the Cultural Revolution. And now I'm fighting against the industrial-scale concentration camps that the Chinese set up. So it's a full swing. I have not been able to escape. And finally, the title should should compel the international community to feel that they cannot escape this reality, that we're dealing with a repressive regime in Beijing, not only developed, tested, and now exporting the brutal authoritarian governance, even supporting Putin. The regime also managed to export something that should concern you, the surveillance technology. That has been metastasizing. It has been adopted at least over 80 countries. To make the matter worse, the consumer products, the solar panels, and electronic equipments that we use at our homes and places of employment is made by modern-day slaves, the Uyghurs. So this is something that no one can say that it's not related to me. No one can escape. So that's the reason for giving this book that title.
So you made a reference to Chinese novelist Yan Liangke, who stated in 2018, so that's a great quote, living in China is confusing now because it can feel like being in North Korea and the United States at the same time. So, can you elaborate? So just tell us more, this is dangerous implications of very skillful manipulation of Chinese Communist Party, of the capitalism, so by giving this cover up and giving this sense of we are almost in America, but still ruling like North Korean dictators.
Right. So as you may have been reading in the news, the Chinese Communist Party have created this Orwellian society, much like the one that has been told by George Orwell in 1984. At the same time, they allowed a handful of Chinese to become wealthy, just like the way that Russia, Putin allowed a handful of Russian citizens to become oligarchs, as we know. So what is happening today in China is that those wealthy people who might be able to make a difference in people's lives, in the government system, they just supporting this regime because their life is too good for them. They can charter 2 airplanes, as been told in this recent book, Red Roulette, for wine tasting in Paris. And they also go to shopping trips all around the world, send their kids to elite schools around the world. At the same time, they're not saying anything because they don't want to be part of that Orwellian system. It could be so quick for them to be facing the consequences. This makes this society, this country, so confusing, even a Chinese author likened to North Korea and the United States at the same time.
Yes, okay, but let's just continue on this, North Korea, United States, so this is this mixture. So you talked about the China's advances on AI.
Yep.
That's the huge investment. And I think that's a combination when you have the newest technology developed in the free world, but now being used by dictators for other things like surveillance. And what kind of impact, that's the Chinese active role, also stealing and developing further this technology, could have both inside China and also outside, because they use this technology effectively in concentration camps.
Right. I have interviewed someone who's an authoritative figure in this particular subject, a German journalist, K. Struttmatter, who spent 20 years in China visiting various cities, a township even, to profile how pervasive the Chinese surveillance apparatus. Today you hear this contact tracing, previously social crediting. Even one instance, one of the individuals that I interviewed arrived to the United States after surviving the concentration camp, was listening to her daughter saying that why technology is so backward, underdeveloped in the United States, why people are still using credit cards. So that's the reality in China as far as the technological aspect, with technology surveillance aspect of the people in China. But what the world has found out recently is how it's been used for human rights abuses, religious persecution, and just as simple as surveilling the people. So why this matters to us? We, at my government job, we organized a hearing about 2 years ago. One of the experts on these issues came to testify and told us that over 80 countries already adopted Chinese forms of surveillance. That means the authoritarian dictatorship or second-tier countries or developing countries around the world not only open to the idea of the Chinese government system, but also they will use this technology to intrude our privacy. And more importantly, for the purposes of this event, they will be monitoring the opposition leaders, the voting records. So it will become a part of the process, electoral process. So it's only not allowing the governments to monitor your life, but also eventually affect our freedom in a basic level. And make the matters worse, to this day, even the United States does not have enforcement mechanism to keep an eye on the spread of Chinese form of or Chinese version of the surveillance. Only one city, San Francisco, said no to facial recognition.
In America?
In America.
So you mean, I live in New York. New York has accepted
Probably. In this same book that I told you, I was alluding to earlier, it says that the United States in schools, hospitals, prison systems, even one instance in military facility was using Chinese high vision as a surveillance camera. The embassy shut down in Kabul was also using the Chinese technology. So this is everywhere now because it's a cheaper alternative. You go to Amazon today, you can still find the Chinese cameras, surveillance cameras. Why do I mention this? When you read the news, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, you oftentimes hear companies like Huawei, ZTE, Hikvision, SenseTime, and people just jump into the conclusion that a certain politician or member of Congress tried to politicize, but the danger is real. Not only the danger is real, but also the American people in general fueling this technology sector through investment. And technology sector, and the Chinese big tech is also supported by Silicon Valley. So, we can talk about China, how bad, that's what they do. But we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to push back? What kind of a legal mandate? What kind of oversight that we put in place? What we do as citizens, as citizens of the free world, to push back. So this is one of the biggest, and also the unique aspect of the Uyghur genocide is the use of technology. Last year, the Biden administration added a Chinese military medical academy to its entity list because it was developing brain-controlled weaponry to be used for ethnic religious minorities in China.
Okay, so now let's move to the main topic of the book, so the genocide. You wrote, for the first time since the heyday of the antebellum South, cotton slavery is once again poisoning the global economy on an industrial scale. Some say it's not politically correct, but that's true. Because I think while we're talking about injustices in the free world, in America for instance, many of these prominent critics, right, they turn a blind eye on real genocide, on something that is reminding of slavery of the 19th century. So, and as you said, it has real impact. This is not just the minor event here and there. So we have millions of people in concentration camps, and their forced labor has been used by Chinese authorities to profit. But for them to export these goods produced in the labor camps, they need someone to import that. Right. And now let's talk about the other side. Right. Because I say, Putin succeeded in selling his top product, which in Russia was not oil and gas, but corruption. But in order to export corruption, you have to find someone on the other end to import it. So let's have a very, very open conversation about those in the free world that don't mind of buying these goods, investing in these industries, while being very active in the United States or Europe, talking about some violations that cannot be compared to the slavery and genocide that's being taking place in Xinjiang.
Yeah. The ongoing genocide is unique because it has, as I pointed out, there's a technological aspect and also a political economy aspect. Even though the Chinese entities, supported by the state, enslaving the Uyghurs previously through agricultural labor. For example, my father spent 3 years in an agricultural labor camp while my mother was in a re-education camp. So this is something ongoing. This is nothing new. The only thing new is that the international community woke up to this brutal regime after the genocide started being carried out by the CCP. Today, consumer products, all the brand names that you can find in the stores, it goes from anywhere from Adidas to Nike, Patagonia, computer components that we use in our offices and homes, solar panels that we put on the roof to conserve energy, and now the batteries, ketchup. The next time when you reach out to ketchup, think about the Uyghurs who are making those ketchup, specifically Heinz ketchup. Campbell soup that you buy from the grocery stores. Because this Uyghur homeland is so rich in natural resources, for example, the rare earth, yes, and also the natural gas, the oil, all the agricultural products, and now the cotton. It's all in one area. In order to resolve China's labor shortage, you hear the term China alleviated millions of people out of poverty, but that came with a cost. How are they going to resolve the labor shortage? How are they going to continue to supply those consumer products to our stores? So they have to look to this vulnerable people. They initially locked them up in the camp, and then when the international community started criticizing, former governor of the region publicly said that all the students graduated. So graduation means from the camp, the concentration camp to the labor camps. I have profiled individuals who've been subjected to forced labor practices. I also have spoken to business leaders through my parallel life being a lawyer. And also, I have also spoke to the experts who have studied and profiled these issues. So based on credible reports provided to the United States Congress during the process of legislating Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the last December President Biden signed into law, anything comes from China to the United States could be presumably made by forced labor, Uyghur slaves, essentially. So there's a law put in place. It has not been fully implemented. The United States, with all this public discussion, legislative mandate, reports, members of Congress holding hearings, the United States still remains to be the largest export destination for Xinjiang exports. In Europe, Italy, export volume last year doubled. So this issue is not just a matter for the American people to concern. This is a global problem. So anytime when you reach out to the shelf to buy cheap consumer products, or anytime that you're wrapping your baby with baby pajamas, if it's made of cotton, the chances of that being made by Uyghur slaves is pretty high, as documented. The next time when you're trying to buy your solar panel to try to conserve the energy, chances of that being made by this paramilitary entity, XPCC, is pretty clear right there. So this is why, as I pointed out earlier, no one can say that the Uyghur genocide is just a matter for the Uyghurs to concern. This is a global problem. If we don't stop this, not only we make the genocide convention that more than 100 countries, 150 countries sign on to, but also make the never again promise meaningless words that people like to say to make them feel good, but do nothing in return.
So when I saw that Disney made Mulan movie in Xinjiang, it reminded me that until 1940, early 1940, many Hollywood studios continued cooperation with Nazi Germany, including those led by Jews, and even allowed, since 1934, the German Consul General in Los Angeles to censor the movies to make sure that they don't include unwanted elements, like Jewish actors, for instance. So are we learning something of history? Or just, it's or money talks? This is a repeat of history. I often say that we don't, history does not repeat itself. We allow history to repeat. 1936, while Hitler was getting ready to invade Europe, Dachau was already built. And he used 1936 as staging a global stage to normalize his behavior. This past February, Xi Jinping was allowed to hold this fanfare to normalize his regime. What happened afterwards? It's a history. They get a green light.
But it's already second in 14 years. They had one in 2008.
Yeah, and
it seems that the IOC has a very strange affection to dictators.
Yeah? And absolutely, every single time, Sochi, after the Sochi, what happened. After the Berlin Olympics, we know what happened. And then after 2008, we know what happened. So this is just a repeat. Not only that, I forgot to mention something very important. Those companies, some of those companies implicated in slave labor, actually official sponsors of last Genocide Olympics in Beijing. Visa, Nike, the Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, Omega. They just went ahead with their own practices to support the genocide in China.
And of course, we know that any attempts in America, like our friend Enes Kanter, to protest, so immediate reprisals from NBA.
Right.
So an NBA that is so proactive in defending social racial justice in America, turning blind eye, and actually punishing people who are trying to point out at genocide, slavery, and human rights violations in China.
That also explains the hypocrisy in the American sports world. They are so ready to criticize when it's convenient, whether it be a business entity or our government, because there's no cost for them. It makes them look good in the eyes of the general public. When it's something so obvious, LeBron James, for example, publicly said that we need to learn better
We need to learn more about China. And then the response was, maybe you should be sent to the re-education camp run by CCP to understand them better.
Yeah, but you know, it always bothers me because, you know, it says while Chinese market is big, but American market is much bigger. And if American public showed any interest in fighting back, I think all these corporations will walk away or basically, you know, make a demand for Chinese authorities to eliminate goods and products that have been produced and manufactured in labor.
Absolutely. The consumer activism, I often get this question, what should we do about this? The government, U.S. government, to its credit, has done what is supposed to be done. But it's now the consumers, the business community, the tech sector to take an action. I don't hold my breath on the tech community, but we already seen how powerful the consumers can be. During the Genocide Olympics this past February, there was an activist calling not to watch the Genocide Olympics, and it worked. More than half, the NBC viewership dropped more than 40%. I think the Canadian TV network, CBC, also equally suffered. So, you know, your voice matters. Your activism, consumer activism, when you see anything made in China, specifically if it's made of cotton, I think you should put it back. I think your action will be noted in business boardrooms by investors eventually.
So just let's shift a bit westward from northwest from Xinjiang, Russia.
Yes.
We have something in common.
Yeah.
I found your name on the list. I'm an enemy of the state, and you also, you're not allowed in Russia. Good. You did something right, so that's just, you were on the name, you know, your name was on the list of 900 plus American officials, including the late Senator McCain.
Yes.
So the Putin is afraid of the ghost of Senator McCain, so he's also, he no longer, you know, is allowed to visit Russia.
Right.
Yeah. So, so what do you think? Any chance that Putin's attack on Ukraine, you know, could somehow influence the situation in China and in Xinjiang?
Oh, absolutely. I'm clear about this. However, the international community handles the ongoing Putin's illegal invasion, war crimes, as a direct ramifications in Beijing. If we mishandle this, if we just dancing around like the way that Western Europe has been, then dictators, authoritarian figures like Xi Jinping will be emboldened. So when Xi Jinping, God forbid, invades Taiwan, it will be very ugly. It will not be handled with sending javelins to whatever the supporters of the...
Lately you saw, yesterday President Biden said there would be adequate military response to Chinese invasion.
Back. Okay. The White House walked back right afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it means that there's debate.
Yeah.
So we heard Biden talking about Ukraine, and you always, you know, heard his officials, which is amazing, yeah?
Right.
Can you imagine, you know, when Reagan said evil empire in 1983, some of the White House officials saying, no, he didn't mean it. So how long this official would stay in the White House?
And also something very remarkably happening, much to Biden administration credit, the Xi Jinping's China has received something very positive, which is that the Western liberal democracy is not dead. They invested so much time and energy in its disinformation campaign, trying to tell their own citizens in the home front and also their supporters around the world that the Western democracies will not speak out if something happens. They were looking for the demise of NATO. They were looking for the demise of the Western alliances. But now with, you know, I'm not 100% happy the way that it's been handled. But that kind of powerful message, seeing the Western liberal democracies coming together, is a bad news for Beijing. And they are, as you can tell from their public statements, they are concerning about potential sanctions against China. For the support of Putin. They don't say it in public, so if you're looking for a public statement, you're wasting your time. This is not the regime will tell what is happening behind the scene, but through the sanctions that the US government has been imposed on them, through the public condemnation of their activities that affecting the American consumers' behaviors, Chinese business is already hurting. About 2 years ago, one of the major suppliers, Huafu, the name of that supplier, filed SEC kind of filing, complaining about losing $100 million, just one business entity. So they're already seeing the effect of, people often say, well, sanctions are not helpful, but it takes time to take an effect. Specifically, when you deal with the regimes like the one in Moscow and Beijing, sanctions and calling them out publicly are very, very effective tools.
So I know we can see that China is very cautious now vis-a-vis Russia, so never recognized Crimea annexation, never supported invasion, so abstained in the United Nations when they voted on the resolution condemning Russia, and all Chinese clients like Kazakhstan, they're also taking this hands-off approach.
Right.
So it's working. Yes. So they are sensitive.
Yes.
Yeah, they pay attention,
Absolutely.
very close attention, when and if free world shows strengths and muscles.
Absolutely. You mentioned John McCain. There are two things comes to mind when I think of that great man. One, the Western liberal democracies cannot just use the dissidents like us when it's necessary, when it's convenient, and then just let them drown to hang when it's inconvenient. We have seen this repeatedly. This is why your job, your work is so important, to continue to call them out. And then the other is that, life is appeared to be very, very depressing, specifically those of us who work in the human rights democracy field. But the hope is our best weapon against oppression. This is also borrowing John McCain's line, that I reminded myself of that every day almost.
Okay, we have a little time left for this conversation. This could be a big discussion. So just, tell us in a few words, so what is the main lesson what can readers take out of the book? Because it's, we're talking about something happening elsewhere, but the world is small. And Xinjiang is a big region, size of Texas and Alaska combined.
Yes.
And the population is nearly size
4 times the size of.
Yes, yeah, it's more than Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's population-wise, it's what? Already 50 million, or just what was the?
It's debatable.
Debatable, but we don't know. But still, we're talking about something really sizable.
Right.
So so tell us. So this what we learn from that? So we understand we have to be proactive, but just give us your final thoughts.
Let me just say that through the process of writing this book, something really surprised me, which is the similarities between Hitler's crimes and Xi Jinping's crime, specifically targeting women and children, using slave labor. The Uyghur population natural growth declined by 60% in 2019. From 2015 to 2017, there was also staggering decline. And then the Chinese embassy goes on public social media and says that they're helping Uyghur women to be liberated from being a baby-making machine. And also there are 800,000 to 1 million Uyghur children have been forcibly separated from their families and sent to state-run orphanages. This is something that we have seen in the history. And also the other surprising aspect is the cost of appeasement. When we deal with a dictatorship, when we deal with the authoritarian figures. I'm part of the US government now, even though I'm speaking here in my personal capacity. I feel so depressed when I talk to some policymakers because they don't take human rights and religious freedom issues as a priority. It does not even take second, third tier in the talking points. So the same officials, same policymakers, always complain when things turn into genocide or humanitarian crisis. We don't have to see another genocide to act. So appeasement is bad. We need to include this in a broader policy discussions, broader human rights and democracy advocacy work, so we can prevent another war, another genocide, another humanitarian crisis.
So there is always reason for optimism.
Yes, absolutely.
And it depends on us.
Yes,
depends
absolutely.
on us, just to put all the pressure.
Champion for change.
Yes, exactly. We all have to be champions of change. Yeah. Nury, thank you very much. Thank you. You show the book. You should show the book. You show the book.
So that's one of the modern stories that doesn't receive attention it deserves. Thank you very much, Nury,
Gary.
for
Thank you.
putting lights on it.
Thank you so much.
I think it, yeah, automatically. Yeah, ready? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel discussion about sports washing. My name is Karim Zidan. I'm a journalist with The Guardian, covering the intersection of sports and politics. Back early at the beginning of this year, I wrote an article proclaiming 2022 to be sports washing's biggest year. The reason I said that is because the year began with the Beijing Winter Olympic Games and has continued onwards, and we've seen several cases of sports washing from Saudi to multiple other countries, and his book ended at the end with the Qatar World Cup. So, with that in mind, it's important to note that all these countries have been accused of a wide range of human rights abuses and have used sports as an opportunity to promote their regimes, to enhance their regimes, and to distract from human rights abuses. This is essentially the process of sports washing, and that's the objective of today's panel, is to provide some insights and some stories from my esteemed panel. And right now I'd like to introduce them, starting with Malcolm Bidali. Malcolm is the co-founder of the Migrant Defense, a Kenya-based civil society organization defending the rights of migrant workers in the Middle East. Bidali is a former migrant worker in Qatar himself, actually, and he was a prominent whistleblower at the time, and he anonymously documented what was going on in Qatar, and then at the end of the day was exposed. And when he was exposed, he was arrested and placed in solitary confinement for a month, and then was eventually deported from the country. So, after that, I'd like to introduce Jemi Hamo, and Jemi is a Tibetan human rights activist and a community organizer who's recognized in one of Canada's leading magazines, Maclean's, as one of the top 50 powers list of 2022. It's a wonderful achievement as it is. I'm based in Canada myself, and that's a hell of an achievement. She's also one of the most prominent youth activists and the No Beijing 2022 global movement. And she was calling for the boycott of the event. Unfortunately, the boycott did not happen, but this is something that we will end up discussing further here. Lise Klovenes, for those of you who are Norwegian or who are based here, really needs no introduction, but for those who do not know who she is, I will give a very brief introduction here. She's a lawyer, a deputy judge, and a former Norwegian national football team player herself. She's also the very first female president of the Norwegian Football Federation, and she's used her position prominently, really, when working with world of sports leaders to bring awareness to the human rights abuses taking place in Qatar. She's done that in recent speeches and has continued to do so. So, can you please give our panelists a warm applause? So I'm really excited to really speak to all of you today, and I'm going to start actually with you, Jemi. So, yes. So really, one of the things that caught my attention when I was reading about you was this quote that you had. And this quote was that every Tibetan born after 1959 is born an activist. Mm-hmm. Can you please expand on that and tell us a bit more about it and your process of getting into all of this?
For sure. For Tibetans who have been displaced not once, not twice, but many times since we lost our freedom in 1959. I believe that the very existence of our people is resistance. The Chinese government currently is hell-bent on trying to eliminate our identity in every way possible, from the way of our lives, the nomadic way of life, the cultural aspect, the religion, even our language, where it's being systemically displaced or replaced by Chinese language. And so when that is happening back home, for us, that's why I say that every Tibetan that is born after 1959, with or without choice, no matter how politically active they are, their mere existence becomes resistance. And that's why I believe that everyone born after 1959 is born an activist.
Very impressive quotes. And how does that lead you towards sports activism? Because that's really what we're here for today. And you were part of that global youth movement with regarding to the Beijing 2022 games. Mm-hmm. So how did one lead to the other?
For sure. I think first and foremost, I want to acknowledge the privileges that I have being someone that was raised in exile because I don't face the oppression that Tibetans inside of Tibet have to face, where there's no freedom whatsoever. And so given that, we've seen in 2008 when Beijing was allowed to host the Summer Beijing Olympics, they made a promise to the whole world that the human rights situation was going to get better. And that was a fake promise. We all knew, especially Tibetans, we knew what was happening on the grounds. And great human rights defenders, specifically like Golo Jimila, who's in our audience today, they were gathering testimonies of Tibetans inside of Tibet, interviewing Tibetans and asking them, what's the impact that this is going to have onto the Tibetans, the local Tibetans during the 2008 Olympics. And even then, the whole community, the international community, did not listen to us. Come 2022, it was again a repeat of that same mistake. China was being awarded this international games, this prestigious games, and what does that do? It's sports washing. What does sports washing do? It has, like Karim already mentioned, it legitimizes the human rights violations that somebody is doing. It's turning a blind eye. The international community is saying, oh, I see you killing somebody, but I'm just not going to see it. But here's my money. Let me support you in killing that person. But I'm not going to say that there's blood on my hands. But there is blood on our hands in the international community, because that's not the first time that has happened. In 2008, that happened. And after 2008, when Tibetans inside of Tibet rose in numbers, Tibet was shut down. How often do you hear about Tibet in the news? Prior to, in the 70s, Beastie Boys was having Free Tibet concerts, and everybody's like, Free Tibet. Now, how much of it do you actually hear? Because information inside of Tibet is impossible to come out. I don't have access to my family members that are extended beyond my immediate family that is inside of Tibet. Why is that? And so speaking of that, the 2022 Olympics, when it was awarded in 2015, Tibetans rose up and told the international community to wake up. They didn't listen. 2020, before Thomas Bach had a meeting with his executive team, over 150 human rights groups, activists came together, wrote a letter to him and said, you did this mistake in 2008, let's not repeat it in 2022. But they still went ahead. That's why, after repeated attempts of activists and organizers trying to reach out to the international community, International Olympic Committee to either postpone or switch the games, not allow Beijing to host it, allow some other country to host it, they didn't listen. And that's why we called for a Boycott Beijing campaign. And earlier you said it didn't happen, but I would like to argue that in many ways we did have many victories, because there was over 16 countries that diplomatically boycotted the Beijing Games. And I think that was a result of the work that great activists like Pema Jomala, who's here in this audience, and many other community members worked really hard for, because months before then, nobody would have listened to us and said, or even a diplomatic boycott was possible. But because of our organizing, because of the protests that we were able to do in Greece, we had 16 countries at least make this say that they care. Now it's up to us to hold them accountable and to allow them to show us that they care.
I actually appreciate you correcting me there and mentioning the diplomatic boycott, because that was going to actually be my next point, that there definitely was a form of a boycott that did take place. Would you consider it to have been effective? Did it change anything necessarily?
I think it's important to understand the context. Why is the Chinese government wanting to hold the international prestigious games of Olympics? They're wanting to host it because they want to seek legitimacy. They want to get legitimized, one, in an international context. They want to be seen as the country that is the first country to host both the summer and winter games. They also want legitimacy inside. Chinese people within China are starting to rise. There are queer Chinese dissidents, there are lawyers, human rights lawyers, there are activists, environmentalists, all of Chinese descent, who are rising against the government. And they see that as a threat. And so they need their own people to buy their narrative, saying, no, we're actually making China a great country. right? And how are we doing that? Because they're able to host these prestigious games. So they're just really trying to host a grand carnival and just do a magic show for the people, right? And we allow that as an international community to happen, right? So with that said, if that is the intention of the Chinese government, when we do diplomatic boycotts, or when we even speak out on an individual level saying China doesn't deserve to host the Olympics, or right now, China must be held accountable about the Tibetan people inside of Tibet, that hurts them because somebody cares. And those diplomatic boycotts, even if it was just words by governments and athletes still got to play, people got to hear about it. Why is our government, pursuing a diplomatic boycott? Norwegians, Estonians, who may have not even heard about what's happening inside of Tibet, are considering, why did our government diplomatically boycott the Beijing Games? Well, it's because of their treatment of the Tibetans, their treatment of the Uyghurs, and all of the other things, the long list of human rights violations that China has been committing for decades.
And we can really move on from China and the human rights abuses that it's committing to Qatar. And Malcolm, I'd like to lead into you next. One of the things that's been spotlighted since Qatar won the right to host the Games in 2022 has been the migrant crisis and the labor crisis and the exploitative and abusive labor that's been taking place, primarily surrounding the construction of World Cup sites, though we can add anything that's taking place right now in Doha, from the building of hotels to roads, etc. Can you please explain this a little further, talk to us a bit about it, and share some of your experiences when you were in Qatar?
Can you please repeat the first question?
Well, the question really is, since we're talking about the spotlight of human rights abuses and migrant labor crisis that's taking place in Qatar. Can you expand on that, please, for us, and then talk about your experiences as well?
Okay, so first of all, glad to be here. Shout out to Human Rights Foundation for bringing me here. First time in Norway. Okay, so the migrant situation is not as black and white as many people make it out to be. Most migrants typically start out, trying to get a better life for their family, just to change the living conditions. They have, school fees for their children, all these things, family support, all those things. And so that's how it begins. Then you go to the recruitment agency. The recruitment agency is kind of like the broker between you and Qatar, or Dubai, or any of the GCC countries. So there you pay a recruitment fee. Mostly it is like $1,000, $1,200 or something of the sort. So you basically have to pay to go to Qatar and all those things. So when you get there, depending on the company you get, be it security, cleaning, gardening, driving, all those things. Sometimes they might switch up the contract on you. So you might sign one contract in Kenya, because sometimes the HR people come to Kenya or Uganda or any of those countries. They come, conduct interviews, and then you sign a contract. But when you get to the country, you might find that they switch the contract on you. So that's one thing. There's a lot of things that happen, and I'm just trying to be as brief as possible, yeah, so that's one aspect. Even the salary itself, you might agree on a certain salary while in your country, but when you get to the Gulf, you find it may be deducted, by a substantial amount. And there's not really much you can do about it, because if you speak up, you're liable to be deported back home or just be, face retribution. And another thing about the situation for the migrant workers is just the living conditions, just for, the lived experience I've had. Cramming 6, 8, 10, 12 people in one room, that is, insane, and it makes no sense at all. And migrant workers are just supposed to kind of take this line, down, and that was what happened actually with me, because at first I didn't want any trouble, because there are no jobs in my country, or if there are jobs, you need to have we call them godfathers, someone in the government or someone who has connections, who can get you that job. So when you get to these countries, you don't want to rock the boat, you don't want to ruffle any feathers. So you just keep your head down, do your 2 years, because it's mostly 2-year contracts. So that was what happened for me. So I kept my head down for as long as I could, but eventually, enough was enough, and I decided to speak out on something. And I was lucky enough that I got the support from a couple of civil society organizations. Migrantstrike.org was the first organization to help me publish my articles. How I got started doing articles is another long story, but yeah. So I did articles and blogs and just basically commentary for like about a year or so. And then I did one particular story that got me into trouble. Yeah, I've answered all the questions, right?
So far.
So far,
and,
okay.
And what I'd like to know now is, okay, so you've gotten yourself into trouble.
Yeah.
You get exposed, and you're arrested by the Qatari Secret Service, or the security service.
Yeah, state security.
State security service, thank you. Now, guide us through this specific experience, if you're willing to talk about it. How was that experience? How was, dealing with their judicial system, if we can even call it that, the prison complex, etc. as well?
Okay. Before I answer that, I'll just take you like one step back, just to provide context. The way I used to write, I didn't write like with my name, like Malcolm and all that. I used to use an anonymous name, not anonymous name, a pseudonym, I used to be Noah. So I had Noah on Twitter, Instagram, on all these other things, and on migrantstrights.org. So because for obvious reasons, you can't really use your real name, It's not like you're like, hey, come get me, So you have to be kind of crafty when doing these things. So that's just, just to set the scene. So I blog and I tweet and I do all these things for about a year, and then I do one story about this particular individual, the mother to the emir, I'm assuming this is a free speech, situation, so, I'm going to name names. So, yeah, Sheikha Moza, she happened to visit one of the properties I was working at the moment. She's affiliated with that property and most of the royal family as well, and most prominent families. That is Misherb, downtown Doha. And so one day I saw something. It's actually a very long story, but yeah, I saw something that wasn't supposed to happen, and I wrote about it.
Okay.
And in Qatar, like, you can write about a lot of things, but don't touch the ruling family. And what do? I touch the ruling family, and because I felt I had to. So fast forward, state security, they didn't actually come for me. I think they gave the order to my company, and then my company handed me over to the state security. So I get to state security, the SSB, State Security Bureau. Interrogation was repetitive, boring, both boring and scary at the same time, because this is the first time I'm facing this, because I thought like the most they would do was just deport me, because in Qatar, you make any form of trouble, the worst thing they can do to you is deport you without your pay or your benefits. So I was thinking like, okay, deportation, like, I can do that.
You're expected to be out of the country by the next day, basically, something like that.
Yeah. But now I'm in the State Security Bureau. I'm like, okay, no, this is weird, So they asked me, who are you working for? Why are you defaming Qatar? How much are they paying you to do this? Tell us about migrantstrights.org. Tell us about Amnesty International. Tell us about Human Rights Watch. Tell us about Equidem, Fair Square, all those organizations that I worked with, And it was repetitive. They had taken all my phones at the time.
Were you given any access to a lawyer, anything, any of that system at all?
One of the first things they told me was that we are not your average police. Yeah, you are, this is you're in a different situation, my friend. So
and this is where the World Cup's being held.
Yeah, they told me we are not your average police. You don't have rights. I told them, no, I need a lawyer. All these things. say you don't get to have a lawyer. Your matter will be decided in court, and So we went from interrogation. Now they're talking about court and all these things. Before that, they had taken all my phones. They had made me give up my passwords, my credentials, all these things. I had done some deleting of messages and emails and all that, but I later came to find out that that was kind of useless, because if they want to mine, they can just bring up the data and all that. So yeah, judicial system, like I said, I wasn't given a lawyer. Wow. Free speech, right? The Kenyan ambassador, the then Kenyan ambassador came to see me. I told him that I didn't have a lawyer. They were supposed to provide a lawyer, because that's what an embassy is supposed to do. It's supposed to take care of your citizens abroad. They did not do any of that, So when I went to the prosecution, the prosecutor was beginning to cross-examine me or question me. And I was telling him, okay, you're the prosecutor, okay? I've watched enough movies and series to know that I need a lawyer. And he tells me, okay, did you come with a lawyer? I told, no, I didn't come with a lawyer. He asked me, did your ambassador come to see you? I tell him yes. Did you ask him for a lawyer? I say yes. Then since you don't have a lawyer, let's proceed. And we proceed to do all these things. And, I was made to sign a confession in Arabic. Like I said, it's a long story. All this is a long story. I'm trying to be as brief as possible. So the judicial system is just... But luckily enough, ILO and ITUC stepped in. They provided legal services for me. And I got a lot of support from the Qataris themselves, the citizens. You need to understand that the Qatari government and the Qatari citizens are two different things.
I think that's a fair point to say generally about authoritarian regimes as well. The people are not the governments in charge, and for the most part, people who live, I'm from an authoritarian country, well, not Canada, but my original country, Egypt. So, that's for debate, wherever you want, but wherever you're from in an authoritarian country, for the most part, you really you can't speak out, you have no say in what the government does. So this is pretty much what you're talking about here, right?
Yeah. And one thing that actually caught me off guard was a letter that was written by students, faculty, staff, alumni from Qatar Foundation. And this was just students, you understand. It got I think 240 signatures and all that. And they wrote it to one of the members of the ruling family, demanding that I be given due process. And they actually said that I embody the values of Qatar Foundation. And they were even puzzled as to why I was being held, because I was just telling the truth. And the government was trying to kind of fix the story that I was spreading lies, defaming the country and all that. But in all my writing that I've ever done, they could never prove that anything I said was, not true. Everything I wrote was true because I've lived it and, I've done all these things. I've answered your question, right?
Yes, you have.
Okay.
Again, for now.
Okay.
But I'd like to move on to you, Lise. You are one of the very few football federation heads who has spoken out, really, about Qatar. Why did you choose to use your position for this specific topic?
Yeah, it's a complex and a simple answer. I was told to do so by the members of the Norwegian Football Federation. We had a debate in Norway, a boycott debate, which ended up with a vote, actually, at extraordinary Congress, where the grassroots of Norway had a big debate, and it voted for not boycott, but 26 initiatives that we should follow. Work towards FIFA, works toward our own system to avoid sports washing. And it was also, I don't know what the English word for, a suggestion coming from the bench, that you come a suggestion at the Congress, which were voted on as well, was that the president, which was not me then, and I was never planning to be a president either, I was the technical director, sports director, was had to go to the FIFA Congress to criticize FIFA for the award of World Cup to Qatar, and for the conditions now that they hadn't followed up on it good enough, and also on the corruption situation in FIFA. So it was a march order from the members
And I also felt that very strongly when, when things were difficult before holding the speech. It was, not easy situation. I was new president, first Congress, a lot of obstructions. I felt very strongly that it was it's a duty I really appreciated to have the honor to do. But still a duty, and I would not say it was me. It was, Norway and the grassroots of Norway.
That's a very interesting thing that you say, that it was a grassroots movement. Does that suggest that sports washing is a commonly discussed topic here in Norway? Is it a prevalent topic? Is it something people take seriously?
Yeah, it's been a process. We've had a very steep, I would say, from the federation. I worked there for some years now, but I spent my life in football, so I've been part of the federation as a national team player. Also critics. I worked as a TV pundit and I saw the federation from the outside, FIFA, UEFA. Now being within, I would say that it has not been a subject for the federation many years ago, and it has been a process, especially when the award was, or the World Cup was given to Qatar, in 2010. It was quiet. Some very few medias took this topic and wrote about it, but not very many. And then some years after, when debate started to arise also in Europe, and FIFA acknowledged more responsibility for the human rights situation, not just the arrangement, 2015 going forward, it started, slowly to increase intensity. But I would say when it really took fire in Norway was after the Guardian article in 2020, it must have been, and then really, pushed the federation. It was a very difficult situation for the federation because we were caught off guard, if I can say it like that, and because it hadn't been a topic at the congresses. Of course, it should have, but it hadn't, not once. Even though the president and the board had done a lot of things, from 2015, visiting Qatar and so forth, it had never been a debate, it had never been a part of the democratic discussion, which it of course should. So it was like not from zero, but from a bit low level to, extraordinary Congress. So very steep learning curve. We did our mistakes in the process as well, but it ended up with, I would say now that it's something that the federation and the members are, very agreed upon that we should engage in, and we're also obliged to. We have the 26 initiatives. It's not only the World Cup; it's general. So, which I think is very good, but we're, amateurs in it. It's difficult because the core of what we're responsible for is football development, and it's difficult to draw red lines because then what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And sport should be played everywhere. Sports should especially be played in countries which need it. You know what I mean? But which event, which terms, which transparency, which discussion should we have on before, and how should the transfer of money go, and all these things is, the federations cannot take this discussion alone. We cannot at every juncture know which turn to take. We're too young in this, but we of course are responsible to dare to be part of it. We're responsible to acknowledge the fact that football is very, very, what should I say, vulnerable to sports washing because of its, global following and extreme popularity. It's very obvious, it's a megaphone for good forces and bad forces. So, but if the blacks and whites are too strong, you will scare away all sports people because then every dilemma will be double standards, and you have to handle dilemmas all the time. You also have to in your work.
It's true. Every situation is different and has to be taken with its own context. You're absolutely right. But you did mention the vulnerability of football to sports washing, and it's true. Sports washing in itself is evolving and is developing, and there's a variety of different ways. Okay, you can expand beyond hosting the Qatar World Cup and go into the fact that there are various monarchies and authoritarian regimes that are flat out purchasing football teams. Very prominent Premier League football teams. I mean, there's Manchester City. Saudi Arabia just bought Chelsea. Pardon? Newcastle, yes. Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Newcastle. As we're we're seeing this occur more frequently, and we've even had Saudi Arabia go to individual people. Now you have Leo Messi being a tourism ambassador for Saudi Arabia. Do you think football is really going to continuously be prone to this sort of corruption, or is there something that can really be done to limit that? You mentioned that Norway wasn't interested in a boycott when it came to the World Cup, but what can really be done actively to pursue this other forms of sports washing in football?
Yeah, it's of course a very good question with not, one answer. I do think, first of all, we have to go into the scene, to adapt to the dynamic discussion, not be like here and we are not in this discussion. And that was, why I was also honored to have the duty to go to the FIFA Congress, because a lot of federation has spoken out towards Qatar award, but not in the bodies, not at congresses, not face-to-face with people, and it was also very difficult. You're also afraid to be disrespectful. It's a different country, it's a different situation, and you should also be humble, but it is difficult because so many wrongs have occurred. So I do think the first step is to have an attitude discussion, real, to have pressure, pressure, gets results. But you cannot fix this problem with only regulations, because then, as a lawyer, I must say, regulation has its limits. You will always have too steep regulations. Then we will try to find something else, which will be just as bad, but legal. So you have to work, with the whole, diagram of things. That it's regulation. Of course, you can try this and that. You had financial fair play. Now they try something else in UEFA. But that will not get us to the goal. Neither will boycott, but the discussion is very rich, I think, and important. So in the end, we need, leaders with, knowledge about the subject, like you tell us, and you have done throughout this year, not knowing it, I guess, because you were a big name for us throughout the boycott debate. You know it, Håvard and the guys. We remember, of course, Malcolm very much, because you were arrested in our boycott debate. And so to have those channels with knowledge, and I do think it's very important that countries also, because I do think it's the demands for championships are so high now, it's easier to have it in authoritarian countries, because then you will have state guarantees like this. It's very difficult to arrange events in countries like Norway, for example, because you cannot give this. These are my speculations, I have to note this, but it's difficult to get the state guarantees because it's not how our country works. So you back out. Now we applied for the Euros for women 2025, and even that, we have not even that, but women football has not traditionally gathered so many people as it's coming now. And we realized this is the last event we will be able to hold due to stadium size and stuff like that, but also state guarantees. So I do think it's a very complex situation where we all have to engage and tackle it together. Like we discussed also outside, that of course we should play football in China as we trade with China. Or maybe we should not trade with China and then we should not play football in China, but football should never, shut down sport so that children cannot, be a part of the global movement. But how can we do that so that they don't start, like Qatar, for example, start with, they have no women's national team, but they start with the biggest, window for sport in the world. Of course, it's not the right process. Now I'm not answering the question, Malcolm, but I do think for us football leaders, we have to be very clear that we have a responsibility. It's not about football not being politics, because it's our own politics. We're affecting the world. It's a global movement, and then we need to look at regulation, leadership, and what's it called, supporter voices, because that will also affect who do you elect. And very importantly, people should be aware that you do elect people in the Western country. It's elections. We have congresses, and people should come to congresses. And we have to make people much more aware that what we call in Norway pump, I don't know what you say it in English, it's, leaders that, just care about money or whatever. If you think that, go and vote then, so that you have a dynamics with the people represent your country.
There's an argument that some critics of sports washing make, which is that if sports do not go to these places, if you don't take global events to these places, places like Qatar, taking events to Saudi Arabia, and the list really goes on with these countries, then there is no opportunity for them to expand on their values and to turn more progressive by just being exposed to other cultures and identities. What do you think, Jimmy, about that kind of statement?
Reflecting on the first question that you even asked about this idea of activism, I think every one of us that is present here, by every move that you make, it's inherently political. There's a saying that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And similarly, when you're silent, that is also complicit. Your complacency is then adding to the murder that is happening right beside you, even if you decide to turn a blind eye. So similarly, when it comes to sports washing, everyone can make arguments, and as both of the esteemed colleagues have mentioned, it's much more complex of an issue. And I think it's important to look at the true intentions and the current situations of the sort of given proposal. For example, speaking to China, because we were avid activists for boycott of Beijing 2022, because there was a track record of human rights violations that has not been happening necessarily in a year or two. It's been happening for decades. The Tibetan people have not been home for 63 long years. My parents were born in exile. I have not been able to enter the land and touch the soil of my own country. And we have not been silent. Tibetans have been rising in thousands in numbers in every community you can find across the world talking about the situation inside of Tibet. And when we choose to turn a blind eye to that, it's pretty obvious that the Chinese government is using it to legitimize themselves. And so it's pretty clear when you look at the track record of these governments and how sports are being used as a tool to ultimately gain legitimation or a seal of approval almost to be able to continue what they're doing. And when we don't speak up, we continue to give them an opportunity for more variables to be able to present at a decision-making table.
I think what you're saying is extremely valuable because it also reflects on the fact that sports have fan bases and different teams have extremely loyal fan bases, and fandom factors in a lot into our discussion because they can be either very useful or very oppositional. It is a form of tribalism at the end of the day, and it has been both a weapon and a curse when it comes to activism. As a journalist, I have faced plenty of opposition from particularly the hardcore fans of any institution. Lisa, what do you think the role of fans, football fans in general, do you see them as being more oppositional to these types of ideas of sports washing, etc.? Are they opposing the idea of an authoritarian, or do they simply not care? Do they simply say things like, I just want to watch the football? Because that in itself is problematic, that kind of empathy, that kind of apathy.
Yeah, sure. And in Norway, where we have supporters that really care. They have been carriers of this engagement in Norway, together with clubs and some medias. So I do think the solution. We're all part of the solution. If you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And I agree. But the the turn and the junctures are not. It's easy when you see it black and white, but it's not. Qatar is pretty. So it's an easy example that it should not be that. The award should not have happened. There was no infrastructure, no football culture, and when it was awarded. But in Norway, the supporter has been, the core of it. And you would say, why would not the leaders go in front? And of course, it's a very relevant question, and we need to ask ourselves that, as leaders. We should not push players ahead of us, not supporters. But we do need the supporters, which are I would never use the word customer for a supporter because we don't, but I don't know what the word forbrukarmakt is in English, but it's very important to have the fans pushing the leaders, showing them, I will not elect you if you don't, do this according to my values, because or else we're a part of a global movement. It's 210 countries. It's a very complex project. Very few of these countries are democratic, and you're supposed to win elections. Infantino is supposed to do that, UEFA president. So you know, the dilemma is it's total, you know. So we need fans to raise their voice and to voice their concerns, and then leaders should, of course, react. And it has, in the sports world, not been so. And I'm very curious now why that fear almost of you know, having a dynamic debate. And I'm new to this. I'm humble. I try to learn. I also feel it myself now. I have very many people telling me about diplomacy. You know, that this is not the way. It was a good speech, but remember, you know, you have the centimeters when in the quiet way. And of course, I know it's also true, but I also know that pragmatism is very important, but sometimes you also need to lift the debate out loud, or else you will never have, you know, a way in for your voices, because then we will like guard. But I do think it's very important that the supporters care more, because regulation cannot do it alone, players cannot do it alone, leaders cannot do it alone, and we would not, I think, be in this position in Norway without the supporters, and that the supporters are now cheering for values aside with their team.
If I may add, I think,
please do.
You know, first and foremost, money talks. That's why it happens. Simple as that, right? But on the other hand, I think it's very important to acknowledge, you know, the dangers of that. When we continue to stay silent as an international community, you're setting precedents. You're continuing to allow it to happen. And when that happens for generations and generations, we create this historical amnesia. People forget the stories of what is happening to the people on the grounds that is being affected. And when that happens, there is a deep danger that all of us will stop caring. What is to be human without caring? You know?
It's very powerful. And that unfortunately ends our main time for this. I believe, Lisa, you have to leave at 6 o'clock. It is now, unfortunately, 6 o'clock.
I told them that I need to be really unpolite and just go, because I meet clubs at the digital meeting. And
no, I understand. However, if we do have time by any chance, you're welcome. You're welcome to leave whenever you're ready.
Here, so
please, thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Pleasure meeting you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. However, if we do have a couple of minutes and there's members in the audience who do want to ask questions and you're willing to answer a couple of questions, by all means. Yep. Yes, right there. Hi. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speak up, by all means, yeah. Absolutely. Of course. Okay.
The body is there anyway. There will be coverage of the football match. But if we can infuse some different type of coverage, because that's also something that journalists like. They like different angles, right?
Of course.
So cover the football match anyway. But if you say, well, that stadium in which this great football match is happening was built, and there was that many people who died building that stadium. Well, that's what also the coverage. So we just leverage the opportunity of sports, of media coverage of the sport event. Turn the conversation back onto something, and we somehow are the body movers, because the conversation is not just about how great football is and how it brings
Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. Raising awareness is absolutely important. Yes, hi, you had a question, right? Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Of course. As I said earlier, Tibet was completely shut down. How often do you hear about Tibet in the news? You know, Tibet is a media black hole. Sending information out of Tibet by phone or WeChat is more dangerous for them than, you know, engaging in protest. I'll talk about this tomorrow, but there's, you know, Yishi Chudun comes to my mind. Yishi Chudun is a medical doctor who protested the 2008 Olympics, and she's still not home. We still don't know about her whereabouts. Thousands of political prisoners have been detained, have been gone missing, their families are missing. That's because of the international world that, you know, stayed quiet during the 2008 Olympics. There's a grid system, a Orwellian state grid system inside of Tibet where everyone is getting tracked. There's face recognition technology, you know. There's also Lhamo, who actually died in prison for sending money to her family members outside of Tibet. That was her crime. She was detained and then tortured and beat to a point where she passed away. It hasn't. Of course, completely. And we said that earlier, right? It's like 2008 was your testing ground. If you really thought that China was going to change, and China actually made promises. They said, I'll make a deal with you. I will make it better inside of Tibet and inside of all of these areas. And they didn't follow up. They lied to your faces, and yet you still choose to give your money to them. Why? What's wrong with us? You know, and if I may just respond to earlier Human Rights Watch, you know, let's make human rights sexy. Let's do it. Let's make it attractive, right? How about having a football tournament that becomes at the world stage celebrated for human rights champions? You know, why does only authoritarian state? We've created the precedents for only authoritarian. At one point, Lisa even said, right, it's almost easier to host these large-scale football tournaments for authoritarian states because they don't have to go through the bureaucracy. So then, why not? Let's create our own version of having fun. I'm sure regular citizens like you and I who care about human rights also enjoy a nice game of football or soccer, a basketball, whatever it is that they want to watch, without feeling like there's blood on their hands for watching a game and cheering for their favorite team. For sure.
That's a fair point.
Yes. For sure.
Absolutely.
Completely agree. That's the
One
boycott,
second,
Beijing.
Hi, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So even I cannot operate as my journalist as if the LGBT thing is written on my
Yep.
to have World Cup. What if the Taliban all of a sudden becomes interested?
I have no doubt.
In Iran, women cannot go to
Yes.
stadium. Like in Afghanistan, women should cover
The
their
cob.
faces and should not leave home. So what if tomorrow, in a fair procedure, the Taliban win the gamble and pass the World Cup? Then are we going to stand our football because football is
Political. Well, for us, as a Tibetan, the Chinese government is our Taliban, and it's happening right now. So if it can happen to us, it can happen to you, right? And when
Absolutely.
I keep saying the people, it is the people are what makes the government. And in that sense, we hold the government accountable. Yes.
This is the consequences that we must see.
And even if the government itself, like Qatar, could tell you, well, all LGBTQ plus people are going to be perfectly safe in Qatar, are you going to believe them? Is that something? Can you take, based on what the stories Malcolm has told us today, based on the story he's told us, can you actually take what they say at face value anymore, or ever in the first place? Pardon? Of course, you have to always factor in that they will never allow nationals.
Non-Muslims. So if I
There you go.
As a Muslim,
Yeah.
and my name is Ali, I must operate and act as a Muslim. Otherwise, goodbye.
Yeah,
And
there you
even that, I don't think, is actually any reason to talk about it, because look at Peng Shui, how she was completely silenced.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about these IOCs, we're talking about the safety of athletes. That's what they told us when we were asking for them to boycott the games. They said, oh, we're scared about the athletes. Athletes shouldn't speak out. There's danger in their lives. Okay, then why are we sending our teams there?
Last question up there.
Hypocrisy.
Of course. Yes. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Of course. Well, I mean, they operate almost as a mafia, yeah. Yeah. What do you think?
Malcolm?
Yeah.
You want to add
No,
anything?
no, I can only speak about FIFA. FIFA in Qatar has been a disgrace. It's been a disgrace. It's about 6 months, I think, to the World Cup, and people are still not getting paid. People are still living in, people don't get paid. People delay. We've had strikes. We've got journalists covered a lot of strikes in Qatar. People are demanding their salaries and all that. Sometimes they choose to delay your salary, so you can work in January, but you get your salary in March. And that time, maybe let's say you've borrowed money to pay the recruitment agent, and the money you've borrowed it from an informal institution, so the interest is way higher. So every time they delay the payment, the interest goes up. So you're caught in a loop. So that is if they decide to delay. So if they decide not to pay, understand? So your family back home is the one who will pay. So that's one thing. So non-payment. They don't even look into, for example, the living conditions of the migrant workers. If a foreign journalist or an envoy of that thing comes to visit Qatar, they will take them to a model accommodation. Look, they have a gym, they have this, they have good food. But no, bring them to the other side. There should be some proper tours of the accommodations there. Migrant workers themselves don't even have the privilege of a normal life. It's like they're, I don't know, like aliens, alienated from the rest of the thing. So my point is just about FIFA. It has been such a big disgrace. Where's the camera? FIFA.
Do better. If I may just add to your question, I think what can we do about these independent organizations? If they're independent, all of these entities that are so-called independent, why do they host games? Money talks. And then it goes back to the same question, right? Who gives them the money? In many ways, and it's not easy to just throw the responsibility on us, but if every single one of us who went to watch the football game is there chanting free Tibet, they can't shut down the live game, can they? Right? And if it wasn't just the activists, the Tibetan and Uyghur and Hong Konger activists in Beijing Games or the Olympic torch ceremony making that call for boycott Beijing, and if it was all of us calling for that, would the games still continue? No, not necessarily. And so I think there's a way for mass mobilization to happen to hold these independent entities accountable. If no one is attending the football games, doesn't matter if it's LeBron James, basketball games not happening. You know, their contracts of millions of dollars is cut because they're not bringing in the viewers. And who are the viewers? It's us. And then we have so much power to be able to hold not just our government accountable, but also media. And for us, you know, when we were organizing about the Beijing Olympics, NBC lost millions of dollars because they had actually the least amount of viewers. And so earlier we talked about diplomatic boycotts, but I didn't get to tell you about all of these other victories we got.
Absolutely.
You know, in terms of the viewership. In Canada, where I'm from, more than 50% of Canadians actually voted for a full boycott rather than a diplomatic boycott. Why is that?
That is true.
Because people are starting to care. They know that their money talks, and they're willing to put it where it matters. And they're willing to walk the walk instead of just talking about human rights.
That's a great point to remember, absolutely. Thank you so much to both our panelists here. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, folks.
That's it.